Welcome back to the Bohnfire podcast, where we talk about the UFC and mixed martial arts with those closest to the fight game. I am your host, longtime MMA journalist and MMA Junkie senior reporter, Mike Bohn. Thank you all for being here for what is going to be a very special episode of the Bohnfire dedicated to the memory of my late friend, Jordan Breen, who, as many as you probably know by now, tragically passed away last week at the age of 38 years old. This is news that left many of us in the MMA community and outside of it reeling, just devastating stuff. But I can honestly say it has touched my heart so much to see all the amazing comments you guys left, not only here in this show last week when I was dealing with the immediate fallout of that, but all the things on other social media platforms, some of these stories and videos that my colleagues have put out there in the MMA media, and just much more. I want to do my part today by doing the show in honor of Jordan, by having some luminaries from across the media world on who knew Jordan both personally and professionally over the years, and just speak on his contributions to the sport that he and we all love so much. I'll also get a thought from each media member that I have on about UFC 316 this past weekend and the fallout of that, where Merab Dvalishvili dominated Sean O'Malley in the rematch to defend his bantamweight title for the second time. And then the co-main event, Kayla Harrison makes relatively quick work, less than 10 minutes, to submit Julianna Peña and become the new women's bantamweight champion. Of course, outside of that, Joe Pyfer, Mario Bautista, Kevin Holland picking up key wins on the main card down there in Newark. I was there for the event. It was a pretty solid one. I thought it was pretty exhausting getting back here, but we were ready to go for a great show for you all. That is not all, though, folks. Today, on the back end of the program, my fellow Canadian, Mr. Ariel Helwani, will be making his debut here on the Bohnfire, not only to do his part in honoring Jordan, but is also this week the 15-year anniversary of when Ariel Helwani and I first met at UFC 115 in Vancouver, June of 2010. In order to kind of celebrate the milestone of our relationship, our friendship, and the first time we met, Ariel and I put together 15 MMA takes from the past 15 years. It was a lot of fun. We hit on a lot of different talking points, and I think you're all really going to enjoy this. A great conversation with Ariel and just kind of putting our minds together, some what ifs, some big moments. I do think you will all really enjoy it. Sit back, relax, let this episode roll of the Bohnfire. And typically in the spot, I would ask you guys to throw a like, a subscription, a comment, whatever it may be. Instead of that, I am going to please ask that you check out the QR code that is on the screen for the duration of this episode, or the link to the GoFundMe in the bio that is for the Jordan Breen Scholarship of Sports Reporting at the University of King's College. This is something we've worked on over the past week since we learned news of his passing, and just an amazing thing that came together. A few of Jordan's childhood friends and I discussed if we could maybe do something like this in his honor. Crazy enough, the morning after, I got a DM on Twitter from a former university professor of Jordan saying he was one of his favorite students and he would love to maybe try to help make something like this happen. And here it is. Took us a few days to set something up from the university, and is now open for donations. I know it is a high goal, but honestly, anything anyone out there can contribute would mean a ton. As I said, QR code out there, link in the description. Please check it out. A lot more information there on this and exactly what the scholarship would entail. So I will take a quick break. Please check that out in the meantime, and then we'll be right back with this all-star cast of MMA media members to honor Jordan, talk UFC 316, and of course, the takes galore from Ariel Helwani and myself. Now being joined by the great Ben Fowlkes from Uncrowned, formerly MMA Fighting, so many different ventures, MMA Junkie Ben, and of course you've been in this industry for a very long time. I know you were one of the ones that kind of knew Jordan a little bit from on the road, and I know you shared some emails and stuff you guys had exchanged over the years. I guess just kind of maybe let me know when you guys first crossed paths, and I guess what stood out to you the most about Jordan and the times you did have the chance to interact.
Yeah, I think the first interaction we had was him inviting me to come on Press Row, the show that he would do where he'd have media members on. And I remember going on, it might not even have been for a UFC card. It might have been for a Strikeforce card where we were sort of previewing the card, something coming up. And just as soon as we started talking, the depth of knowledge that he had about every single fighter, prelim guys on up, I remember distinctly having the thought, I'm in over my head. Like I do not have the information and the knowledge about every single person that he does, and so I was just sort of trying to keep up. And that seemed to me like a lot of what it was like to know Jordan just generally, that you'd
Yeah.
be in a conversation with him about anything and you'd feel like I'm struggling to keep up because he talked fast, he thought fast, he had a lot to say on every single topic. And yeah, it was just like in the current age with media relationships and just like relationships with a lot of people, you know each other for so long on the internet before you ever finally meet in person, if you ever finally meet in person. And so the first time, I sat down, had beers with him, and he had like this huge spiked up hair and like this very carefully manicured beard, and he was wearing like a bunch of crazy outfit stuff where I was just like, I'm pretty sure those don't go together. And it was such a weird thing to go from knowing this guy on the internet and then you meet him in person like this and you're like, who is this person? Who moves through the world this way?
Yeah, and the thing I loved about that is, I've mentioned it with some of the other guys. Like, you did feel intimidated when he invited you on those shows, but he never made you feel like you were lesser. Or like that knowledge you did feel maybe intimidated by was out of your depth, or treated you poorly because maybe you couldn't hang on in the same way.
Yeah, no, he wasn't ever doing it to be a jerk or,
No.
it was just that was his level of like enthusiasm for the sport. And so it made you want to sort of catch up to him and join him in that. And that was one of the things that I always really enjoyed about having his voice in the media space was that he really had a great sort of bullshit detector, and if stuff wasn't what it claimed to be, offerings from promoters, claims made by fighters, coaches, he was going to tell you. And he was not just going to be there to play nice with everybody and try to get along. He was going to tell you when he thought that somebody was lying to you, and I appreciated that a lot.
Yeah, and I think what we talk so much about his radio shows and his podcasts and everything. I consider you obviously one of the great writers we've ever had in MMA,
Thank
and
you.
I think that's something that is maybe not discussed enough with him, is what his ability was as a writer on top of a voice on audio or video programming.
Well, yeah, and that's something that I've heard talking to other people about him since his death and since that news kind of rippled out. And the Sherdog guys found him basically when he was like a 19-year-old kid writing about Japanese MMA, and they would just like read it on the internet and go, "Who is this person? How does he have this depth of knowledge about it?" And yeah, that I mean, especially before the explosion of podcasts, that was really how you got your voice out there and how you contributed to the MMA discourse. And it was also one of those things where once you knew him, you could read something he'd written and you could hear his voice in it, which I always think is the mark of a strong writer, because it's a
Absolutely.
unique, distinct voice, and you're sitting there reading it, and it feels like you're listening to him talk.
Yeah, for sure. Anything else you kind of wanted to throw out on him? Maybe like a memory or any time you were awestruck by his mind, or do you think we kind of covered it all?
The only other thing that I would mention is I remember I was kind of going through old communications we had sent. I think I saw Mike Chipetta on Twitter talking about how, he's looking through emails to be like, what was the last time we talked? And looking through it, and you just pull up some of these messages and like where I realized, okay, he's sending me this at 5 o'clock in the morning, and here's a bunch of thoughts that he has about an upcoming, Elite XC fight card or something. And I can remember sort of at the time, you'd roll over, check your phone or something in the morning and be like, I can't, not right now. I can't do it, but then it was just like, that was just sort of what it was like to kind of know him. You just get this message, or, I saw one like email come through where it was just like middle of the day. And he was just like, you got to listen to this new Ghostface Killer song. And I was just like, all right, man, we had just been talking about Gina Carano, but sure, like let's change topic, let's change course right away. And that was just kind of you couldn't guide any conversation with him. It was just you were along being pulled by the current.
Yeah, totally. Well, I appreciate all those words. And, before I let you go, obviously, the sport Jordan loves so much is this one, mixed martial arts. We just had UFC 316 over the past weekend. I'm hitting everyone with the true or false to come out of the fallout of this event. And since you are Montana guy, where Sean O'Malley fell short in the main event, I'll throw this one at you, Ben. True or false, Sean O'Malley will never fight for a UFC title again.
I'm gonna say false. I
Hmm.
think that he brings enough attention and fan interest that he could potentially change weight classes, win one or two fights, and the UFC would find a way to give him another title shot. Just because I think that being somebody people know is such a big part of the battle at this point, and I don't think it would take that many, especially if he were to move up to featherweight, try his luck there. I could see it.
Yeah, were you surprised by the outcome there? Like, obviously, Merab, we got to give him his flowers, but Sean makes all these changes and gets a result that you could define as worse than the first time.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be too negative on a Montana guy, hell in his own,
Sure.
Sean O'Malley, but it did strike me in the lead up to this fight that of all the changes we were hearing about, very few of them seemed transferable to the cage. It was he's not dyeing his hair, he's not smoking weed, he's off social media, he's not jaying the peen, changed his walkout music. I don't see how any of that helps you against Merab. The deficiencies you have to make up against a guy like Merab are of a completely different nature, and they're really, really hard to make up that ground in such a short span of time. So Merab is just so good that I don't really look at it necessarily as that was a huge Sean O'Malley failure as much as that was just Merab showing that he's still getting better.
Yeah, totally true. Would you like to see Sean go to 45, or do you think he sticks around 35? Maybe I saw Henry Cejudo call him out. I'm sure anyone would like to fight him. Do you think, what would you kind of advise as far as the weight class direction here?
I think there's a little bit of a limited future at 135 right now, just because how high are you going to rise? The UFC is not going to want to give you another title shot as long as Merab is the champion, and he looks like he could be the champion for a good long while. So I think 45, you get kind of a fresh start. You go up there, and the problem is a lot of fighters, when they have gotten used to being the taller, lankier guy for the division, they gear their fighting style around that. I think Sean O'Malley is one of those guys. If you go up to 45 where you're fighting bigger fighters, maybe you don't have that advantage anymore. Maybe your power doesn't quite translate the same way up there. Those are all concerns, but at least I think you get some new life if you go up to a new weight class and you have a bunch of fresh matchups that we haven't seen before.
Yeah, big time decisions to make for Sean O'Malley. Appreciate that insight, Ben. Appreciate you being here and giving your thoughts on Jordan and this tribute episode to him. So appreciate your time very much, man.
My pleasure.
All right, joining me now is Luke Thomas, man, who I feel like you and me talked a lot about Jordan over the years, especially, in kind of the later years as we had a mutual kind of a concern for him. And I appreciate that you would always check in on him through me when you could and everything. It's obviously been a tough day and tough week, but we're trying to, shed the positive as much as we can on his contributions to MMA. I guess I know you did that great video. If anyone hasn't seen it yet, go please watch it on your YouTube channel. But I guess as you kind of sit here and you've had a week to digest, what do you feel like, Jordan Breen contributed to our sport?
Just a standard. I mean, there are many things, but I think if I can give a more digestible answer is, for me as someone in media who participated in media at the same time that he did, is really a standard of excellence. I mean, as I mentioned in the video I put on my channel, it was I thought, and I still believe this, obviously, that Jordan's real gift was the ability to take in a wide amount of information, but also like esoterica and things you wouldn't even know, and then turn it into a place that you could have, adoration for it. He would teach you the joy of not just learning things, but then the joy that comes once you're like an inside player, so to speak. And he had a unique ability to do that. But if we're just talking about what he contributed to the sport more broadly, that is part of a broader whole of a standard of excellence. And this is all the way down from what he did for SureDog as a site, what he did in managing the SureDog Fight Finder, which still obviously is very potent, but at the time was far away the gold standard, what he did in terms of broadcasting, what he did in terms of setting the tone for what it meant to be knowledgeable when you talk on this microphone. He was the opposite in many ways of just a current era of podcasting more broadly, certainly beyond the confines of MMA, where it's, podcasting equipment is cheap and any idiot can get up there. It was, at a time when you had to be a little bit more selective about it and who got the opportunity to do those things. He was the guy, to me, who was setting the standard for what excellence looked like in that role and what it looked like in managing a site and what it looked like in, and frankly, loving MMA. I think he taught a lot of people the good side of MMA, the bad side, the fun side, the wacky side, the weird side. And he had a keen interest in how all of it worked and how all of it kind of came together in the end. And, a very, 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 very difficult act to follow. And I say that obviously is a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, again, trying not to make comparisons here, but I think of you as one of our great minds and one of the great orators in our sport, and can do a lot of the same things you kind of listed there. And I wouldn't put too many people above you, but I feel like you put him above you. Was there a moment where even his ability to do all these things, his knowledge retention, his recall, even kind of had you in awe?
I mean, from the earliest days,
Yeah.
because if we went to the same event, the reality is if we went to the same event, I mean, obviously Jordan always had insightful things to say, but there was a lot of similarity between it. But the thing that was interesting was when I first encountered him, he was running basically this independent site on Vale Tudo and MMA in Japan. And it was the most remarkable thing because I was like, there's no way you could run this site if you didn't speak Japanese. And he still did. And you would absolutely not be able. And this is obviously long before mass translation tools were. I mean, there were some obviously at the time, but it's not as ubiquitous or useful as they are now. And yet he still found a way, not merely to, again, I cannot overstate this. It wasn't just that he understood who was what and what the players were, but could relay it to you in a way where you thought you may never even understand who these players are, much less why it's interesting. And he had a certain fire and command of the information. And to me, it was the marriage of the two that was like immediately impressive. And like the fact that he was doing this in his teens is just, kind of shocking in retro. I mean, it was shocking at the time, but certainly as we reflect upon it, it remains so. It's just a very, very unique combination of skills and vision. And it was apparent from my first encounter with him.
Yeah, it truly was. Well, I appreciate those insights, Luke. And as we kind of transition here, talking about the sport he loves so much, UFC 316 this past weekend, kind of been throwing a true or false on a storyline coming out of this event. I want to go to you for the main event. Merab Dvalishvili obviously defends that belt again, and he has this ambitious plan for 4 title defenses this year, never been done before. We've had 7 guys do 3. I asked him about it post-fight. He still wants to do it. I asked Dana White about it post-fight. He said that's a schedule they would be open to accommodating. What do you think? True or false? Does Merab get 4 title defenses in 2025?
I might say true. I mean, I might regret it because it's just very difficult to get the opportunity to even do it, much less to be able to physically pull it off. And of course you have to win the first 3. Otherwise the 4th doesn't exist. I mean, there's just a whole lot that has to happen that has to go your way. That still seems like a bit of an uphill climb, but it also just seems like if anybody is a candidate for it, it's gotta be this guy who seems, as we know, insanely cardiovascular in terms of amazing condition, but kind of durable as well. Came in 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, whatever it was, with a busted toe. Seemed like no big deal on fight night. He looked even better this time than he did all the way back relative to 306 in their first encounter. Again, a lot of things have to go right? The stars do have to kind of align, and these are factors he is not necessarily in control of. But if you were trying to find like what kind of guy is the right candidate at a time when the division could potentially accommodate him, it's got to be Merab. And I can't even think of anybody else who would be close in championship history that really so perfectly suited for this kind of goal.
Yeah, it's interesting because you just look at the way the schedule has mapped out. There's no September pay-per-view now, right? We'll get 2 in October, but I feel like if there's a clear spot on that July or that August event in Chicago, a co-main event, if he's on there fighting Corey Sandhagen in the co-main event below Dricus and Hamzat, I feel like this actually really will happen. If he's not on that card, I think it's going to be a big stretch.
The only issue is if he can stay hot and do something interesting, this changes the equation. And I know he just headlined, and I understand that. But what I'm saying is that might become a little bit more difficult in other places, depending. Now, not September, as you indicated, but it's. I don't know if he's able to headline every single slot that's available. There might just be some of those, so that too could complicate it. But again, a very, very good candidate for this kind of ordeal.
Yeah. What's your early, I know you haven't done a deep dive, but an early analysis of a fight between Corey Sandhagen. Corey Sandhagen out here openly admitting in interviews the only way you could beat this guy is to knock him out.
I don't know how you can disagree with that. I actually said that all last week. I was like, if you play the game where I'm going to against the fence defend his takedowns, but I'm going to take time getting up and then take time separating, you're going to lose. Like, you're going to lose time just on the clock. And that didn't even take into consideration him being able to submit people from that front headlock position, which he uses to control their ascent. So that's a huge problem. Then, of course, on the feet, look at how much better his defense has gotten. Look how much better his offense has gotten. And then on the ground, his ability to just keep Sean O'Malley there while opening up his ground and pound a little bit at the same time. This is a very, very, very difficult problem to solve, to say nothing of the cardiovascular input, which is basically limitless. I will say this. I'm not going to favor any bantamweight over Merab at this point. I think there's a debate to be had about who's the GOAT at bantamweight, but I can just say this, having seen them all, and I know you've seen them all as well. He's the most overwhelming force at bantamweight I've ever seen. Whether or not his championship run you want to state as the number one, different question. I've just never seen a guy this comprehensively overwhelming. However, two things I would say. I think Sandhagen has the right idea. You might have to punt 1, 2, potentially even 3 rounds just to find the right opportunity to really hurt him, because you're just not going to win an attrition game. You're not going to win a volume game. You're not going to win a game playing for height on takedown defense. And then I think the other part is going underneath, which you saw against Davison Figueiredo, where he initiates a leg lock going backside 50-50, right? He's setting the offensive terms. Even if you take someone down and they're working off their back, they're still working on the person who put them there's terms. That's different when you go underneath. And if that doesn't work, you can still come out the other way like he did against Figueiredo and go bottom to top. So there's a threat of a not just a submission, but if you don't address it, or even if you stop it, there is a corresponding position change threat as well. And I think that kind of thing could suit him very well, assuming he can get that going. So I'm highly intrigued by it, but I think you got to favor Merab against everybody.
I think so too. And it's so crazy that we say that, because I remember like probably a year ago when Sean O'Malley got the belt, it was like, you know, I don't think anyone's going to be a long-term division. It's such a like divisional champion at 135. It's so deep. It's going to be hot potato, maybe 1 or 2 defenses. And that's been the history of it up until here. But we will see if he can get these 2 more defenses this year. He would have 4. No one has more than 3 at bantamweight. So I think that's a discussion closed for the GOAT. But right now I feel okay putting a pin in it and see what he does with this run and giving Dominic Cruz his respect until this rides out.
34, still getting better. Now is not the time to count out Merab.
For sure. All right, Luke, I really appreciate you being here in honor of our friend Jordan and talking a little UFC 316. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much.
Anytime.
Joining us now is the great John Pollock, a man who lived here and spent many a night out with Jordan Breen and, worked in the industry for many years alongside him, whether it was in your MMA days, John, or since you moved into the pro wrestling world more with post wrestling. Can you just tell me, I guess, how you first interacted with Jordan, maybe when you first met him and first memories?
Well, with Jordan, I mean, I had been like obviously following his work for a long time, but it was not until, he was starting to pop up at a lot of the UFC events. This was, for a long time, Sherdog was operating like outside of press credentials with UFC, and then they were welcomed back in. And I think the first time that we would have met face to face would have been at UFC 158 in Montreal. This was the George St. Pierre, Nick Diaz card at the Bell Center. And I remember at this period that it was, you follow Jordan and this guy brings about him like such a level of, I think a lot of media contemporaries would say the same thing, like almost this intimidation, because you knew this guy had this level of intellect in the sport that it would dwarf those around him. And so when I first got to hang out with him proper, it would have been later that year in June at the 161 card in Winnipeg. And it was such a eye-opener of any kind of intimidation that you would have of this guy. It was like, the guy had a heart of gold, and that was what struck me. So really it was that Winnipeg week that I spent there and got to hang out with Jordan a lot, and just in terms of, getting him away from just a guy that I listened to or read, and actually getting to hang out with Jordan Breen, the individual.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's actually a pretty common theme with what a few of us have said on the show is like, he would invite you on his program or you'd have heard him, and it would be intimidating to be like, you knew the knowledge he brought and you're like, how am I even going to hold the candle to this guy? But he never made you feel that way, right? Like he was just himself, and you come on and you would have your opinions, and he would treat them with the respect and the dignity that they deserve. And you never felt like, even though you knew the knowledge for him was maybe up here, you never felt like it was down here in comparison.
Yeah, and that was sort of my approach to things too. Is that at that time, I'm doing all my work at the Fight Network. It's a lot of on-air work, and that's the thought of like, here's this guy, and it was like, what would his opinion of me be, for instance? And
Right.
that was just exactly like if you heard. Like Jordan was a guy that had no hangups on shining a light on other media members, other outlets. Like when you got invited onto his press row, it was almost like this. He was kind of just shining a light on various people, and would never in all of my interactions with Jordan did I ever feel he spoke down to me, or just he was always meeting people at an equal level. And I thought that's a part I've certainly gone back to a lot over this last week, thinking about of just how he treated everybody like his equal, even though this was a guy that I think, like, this is not hyperbole, that I think everyone looked at Jordan as just this savant in this area.
Yeah, definitely. We were lucky to have him in that regard. And I think something that we could all take away to kind of, honor him in that regard. I know we all get caught up in our own worlds, and it's so busy, especially with the schedules we deal with MMA and pro wrestling, more so on your end. It's hard sometimes to take a step back, but I think that's something we should maybe try to all do a little bit more going forward. Is there like a time, whether it was in your discussions about mixed martial arts or pro wrestling, where he said something or you noticed from something that kind of awestruck you a little bit in terms of like his knowledge of either of those industries?
I mean, he would be someone that, he would just go down all of these different rabbit holes. And when it came to pro wrestling, like, it just always amazed me that here is this guy that has this expertise in MMA. And as you could say, like, you could go down this discussion hole with him on rap and hip hop, or in this case, professional wrestling. And I remember, like, I would get late night texts from him because he's been going through old episodes of WCW from 1990 and talking about, like, how much of a fan he was of the Nasty Boys or Missy Hyatt. And then he would have like a whole separate thing on just why this worked at the time. Like, he would have such an understanding of, like, just taking some form of entertainment, sports, what have you, and breaking it down in such an interesting way that I never took that aspect for granted either. Like, this is something, like, in the moment, I just thought of, he was such a analytical person. And, it tends, you interview a lot of people, Mike. Sometimes it's these brilliant people you will speak to, and they're great in writing, but in actual, like, communicating it just doesn't compute. You can take a lot of very dry details and it just doesn't comport to podcasting or interviews. Jordan was someone who could write tremendously, but he could also communicate so effectively and in an entertaining forum. Mm-hmm. And that was, a gift that I think everyone always is trying to perfect, is kind of, you can have the knowledge base, but sometimes it's very hard to share that information to an audience.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the three of us when we'd go sometimes, and you guys would start chatting about pro wrestling, and my knowledge of that world is definitely not what it is in terms of mixed martial arts, and I'd almost just get lost in your guys' conversations, as even though I wasn't clearly as aware of all the intricacies of what you guys were speaking on, it was just so captivating, and obviously his passion for all that stuff was unmatched. So let's talk about the sport briefly that he was so passionate about, mixed martial arts. We just saw UFC 316 this past weekend. I've been hitting everyone with the true or false coming out of this event. I want to talk to you about Kevin Holland a little bit here. Obviously, a great win over Vicente Luque. Hits him with his own move to finish the fight. True or false, Kevin Holland is good enough to fight for the UFC welterweight title?
Ooh, I'm gonna go false on that one. I mean, Kevin Holland, if if he can maintain the consistency level, I think that's the biggest Achilles heel for Kevin Holland. Is we see performances like this that he demonstrated on Saturday, and you can open up a question like that, and it's one you have to sit and think on. And then there's other ones he comes out and you get frustrated sometimes watching him. I just think welterweight, it's at a really interesting point now with Jack Della Maddalena and the various challengers. Like, it's going to take like several wins and performances like we saw on Saturday. And Vicente Luque is a nice win, but I think like he definitely has the deck stacked against him. But it's certainly not a crazy one, but if gun to my head, I'm saying false.
Yeah, we'll see what he could do. I mean, if he gets this Colby Covington fight, even with Colby Covington being where he is, that's obviously being like a kryptonite style matchup for him, both at welterweight and middleweight. So if he could get through that, that would be more telling. My biggest path to maybe for him is if he can string together 3-4 in a row and something falls out late notice, they need a guy and like he slides in there, just more of an opportunistic one. But I agree with you. Like, is he gonna beat number 6, then number 3, then number 1, and then get a title shot that way?
The conventional pathway is definitely the tougher one, and you bring up the most likely of scenarios that, hey, fight week, we lose our challenger and we need to keep this card together. That benefits the likes of a Kevin Holland, certainly.
Yeah, did not work out with him for like the Hamzat Chimaev situation, but some crazy thing like that could maybe eventually play out in his favor. So it's very possible. Okay, John, I appreciate you so much for being here to honor our late friend, talk a little bit about UFC 316. Means a lot that you came and appeared on the show in honor of Jordan.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mike. Some of my favorite memories are the three of us hanging out together. So I know this is not a great set of circumstances for all of us this week, but I'm glad you're doing this show.
Thank you. All right, joining now is Esther Lin, Casey Leydon, two people very well known in the MMA media world, and two people I think that were actually formative in my relationship with Jordan, because you guys knew him before I did, and then kind of, I think vouched a little bit maybe for our friendship there. I know, like, when I'd stayed at your guys' place in LA, he had stayed there previously and stuff. I mean, just tell me, I guess, was that like some of the first times you guys had met and really got close when he was staying over at your place?
Well, no. When did we meet Jordan? It had to be very early on in our kind of, when we were more part of the traveling circus. Mm-hmm. Going town to town, and and Sherdog was like the big MMA site in the game. So we would obviously, I think we just kind of met him on the road and everything, and we just I don't know, there are a bunch of weirdos in this sport. And for some reason, he was the type of weirdo that we really connected with instantly, I guess. So at least over a decade ago, maybe way more than a decade ago, probably like 15 years ago.
15 years ago, because I think he stayed with us, I want to say in like 2013 or something. He said he was going to come stay with us for like a week, and then it ended up being a month.
Yeah, it was fine and everything.
It was just fine.
It was just like, she had to remind me. She's like I remember in the time, she's like, Jordan's still here. I'm like, yeah, I know, it's awesome, huh? I'm like, he's gonna stay for a week. I'm like, oh yeah. I'm like, I don't know. It was just why was he even in town? I'm not even sure. Now looking back, I'm not even sure why he was even at our place for a month. But that was just a small part of our Jordan Breen experience. But it was always especially pre-COVID, we used to travel to every UFC event, every big UFC event, and I would say about 1 out of 3 of those, Jordan would be there. So we got to spend a lot of time on the road. You got to spend a lot of time at our home in Inglewood, and what was the question? Sorry.
No, you guys hit it awesome. I just wanted to know about kind of some of those formative years. And I know, like, Esther and we were catching up a little bit over text. You're talking about those car drives you guys would have to the Vegas events from California. I know we've done a few of those ourselves together. And I don't know, do you have any memories from those? Because I know it's a lot of hours on the road and a lot of time to either listen to music or chat and catch up and things like that.
Well, Jordan and I actually never really drove to Vegas together, but one of my favorite things is even after I knew him and we were friends and stuff, I would still listen to his shows. So like, no matter what, every Vegas pay-per-view that we drove home from, I would always put on Beat Down After the Bell to listen to, and I always listened to them. To Jordan and TJ or Jordan and Josh, whoever was speaking, you just gotta hear and hear Jordan's perspective on the fights, because it was always right on. So
Yeah, Jordan really kind of, I want to say, before I really started listening, just listening to Jordan has just a on-air personality. I liked MMA. Yeah, I got it. It was honestly more of a job, but he really made me start appreciating the sport and the fighters, and also how stupid the sport was and can be, and things like that. No, he made me love the sport, but also kind of hate the sport in a fun way, I guess.
Yeah.
And it's just speaking of that right now, I just want to share the story. I remember when he stayed with us for a month. So of course in that month, I think there was a big pay-per-view or something at that time. So it was actually really fun to watch Jordan watch the fights, and then as soon as the fights were over, go to the back room and then just talk about it. And I was just like, dude, I was just right there with you watching the fights, and we were kind of just no BS and no talking watching the fights. But then like he just has this like, I was like, dude, we saw the same thing, and he just saw so much more than me in a very intelligent way, and it was just like it was kind of cool watching the man work in action. It was just really neat. And yeah, it was just, I don't know, just it's been after the initial sadness of finding the news out, when that kind of not passes, but you kind of get through it a bit, then you kind of get to those fun parts, those fun memories, and like things I kind of I thought I forgot, but then even talking about it now, like the feelings are coming back, and just those moments with Jordan, and just watching him work, as a professional, and then just hanging out with him as a friend.
Yeah,
And
no, that's exactly what we're here to kind of celebrate today.
Yeah.
And, share these stories. And it literally reminds me of one that I've kind of told a few times. But when you're watching those fights with him, and then he goes to the show after, like I was there when he was literally like, I know he wasn't watching the fight. He's either like on the balcony having a smoke, or like chatting on his computer, tweeting one of his very Jordan-esque tweets, and then he goes on Beatdown after the bell and like describes what happened at 3:36 of round 2. And I was like, you were outside, bro. Like you did not watch this. But how are you describing it so perfectly, like it happened? I still can't wrap my head around how he was able to do this.
Yeah, I remember like it'll be like a 15-minute fight, and he'll watch like the first 3 minutes of fight. It's like, okay, she'll win by decision. He'll walk out of a smoke, and I'm like, I'm gonna watch this fight because I'm a fan. I'm like, oh, he was right. I should have just walked. I should have taken a smoke break too.
Yeah, no, he could see what was coming. Well, yeah, no, I appreciate these memories so much, and in honor of Jordan, kind of want to talk about the sport still too. We obviously had UFC 316 this past weekend, and when I honestly think of you two, I think a lot of women's MMA, because your work with Invicta and just all those athletes you guys have been involved with over the years. So we saw obviously Kayla Harrison take Julianna Peña's title. I've asked a few of the other people about kind of the Nunes and Harrison fight. What about Julianna Peña's future here, Casey? True or false? Do you think she fights for a UFC title again? She says she has dibs on the winner.
She does not have dibs on the winner, but shoot your shot. Go for it. But honestly, I hope the UFC gives her. I hope the UFC doesn't fulfill her wishes. I hope she just gets one win, one big win over a top 5, top 10 bantamweight on a winning streak. Maybe Vieira or something like that. I'm not sure if that's the person. I can't.
Maybe.
I don't want to get into like the 35 division. I'm not here to trash it right now.
Sure.
But she needs a win, and so any win, any legitimate top 10 win over a 35er, then I think there's justification, from a business standpoint for the UFC. So because I think she needs a win. That's all.
For sure. Anything to chime in, Esther?
nope, not at all.
You agree with everything Casey said, word for word.
Sure.
Okay, awesome.
I have to say, I've been really enjoying being out of the sport and for a bit, and just kind of watching it from afar.
Yes, well, we love it when you do parachute in, and we get the honor of your presence at some of these events, Esther, because you're one of the greatest to ever do it. Obviously, anyone who's watching this, if you're not aware of Esther Lin's work, go find it. It's anywhere and everywhere in the MMA space. But appreciate you guys both being here. Casey, keep doing your thing at MMA Fighting. Esther, keep killing it wherever you're at and whatever you're doing. It's always awesome and elite stuff. So appreciate you guys being here to honor Jordan and talk about the sport. It means a lot.
And thank you to you too for putting this together for him.
Of course. And joining me now is a very, very OG member of MMA Media and someone who knew Jordan, I think, longer than most of us who are on the show today. It is Josh Gross. Josh, I know you were the one who hired Jordan at Sherdog, I believe, right? Or discovered him. Can you tell me about when you first crossed paths with him and discovered the brilliant mind of Jordan Breen?
I certainly brought him to Sherdog. To say that I discovered Jordan Breen would probably be giving myself credit where I don't deserve it, because I think Jordan discovered himself. Yeah, this was 2006. I was editor of Sherdog.com. I was going on 2 years of editing. I started there in 2004 as the executive editor. I'd been covering MMA since the year 2000 and a fan into the, back into the 90s. We were looking, this is 2006, so this is post Ultimate Fighter 1 and, the sort of the Zuffa era kicking off and starting to gain some momentum. We were looking to expand coverage. I certainly wanted as much mixed martial arts coverage globally as I could find. And I went off on a quest trying to find people who were producing interesting work, who I thought had a point of view, who, from my perspective, was really important to come at it from a journalistic lens. Mm-hmm. And somewhere along the way, I crossed paths with Jordan's, I guess it was a blog. I guess that's what you would call it back then. It was just the page where he was putting down his screeds and his comments, and his coverage of then really was specifically Japanese mixed martial arts. I reached out to him. I wanted to know who he was and get a sense of him. And, I was like, pretty quickly, I was like, wait a second, you're a kid from Nova Scotia and you're writing about Japanese MMA like you live in Roppongi. Like, what is your deal? And I think I got a sense from Jordan right away that this was someone who was obviously extremely bright. And I knew that he was a college kid when I met him. And so he was someone who, at least I thought, had a sense of where he wanted to get in the world and had some drive, and clearly was producing content that echoed, that. And I thought, he would make a great contributor. We wanted more in-depth coverage of what was happening globally, like I said, but especially in Japan, as Pride was kind of just, on its last legs. There was still a really vibrant culture of mixed martial arts in Japan. But it was hard to get that across to English-speaking audiences. Even if there were good reporters in Japan, which there were, the language barrier made it difficult. So they may have been seeing and expressing things in really clear ways for their audiences, but it just wouldn't translate for people like me and other English-speaking people. And Jordan had a way of bringing something that was thousands of miles away, almost in like vivid color, like right in front of your face. And this wasn't Jordan pontificating or offering his opinion and sharing his deep well of knowledge. He was just a kid who had an interest, who was obviously gifted. And I saw in him someone who could, at a baseline level, help our coverage. But beyond that, I was like, this is someone with a lot of potential to pretty much do anything he wanted. I think I came to that conclusion early. And while I did intentionally rein him in, I made sure that he contributed what I asked him to contribute and nothing beyond that, because I sensed in him very early that he was extremely eager to do everything. Yeah. And when you see someone with talent who's ambitious, from my experience, sometimes the best thing you can do for them is hold the reins. Say, stay in your lane a little bit, learn, watch, grow, understand. And that was my early intention with Jordan. He was going to go down whatever path he was going to go down. He could have done anything. And I believe that the entire time I knew Jordan, and sadly, after his passing, it was really one of the first thoughts I had that, this guy could have done anything. Yeah. He definitely made a huge difference in our Japanese MMA coverage at the beginning. And then I worked with Jordan for 2 years, and I know a lot of people have been reflecting on Jordan. Certainly you have, you were a close friend of his, and other people who viewed him as peers, as colleagues. there was this dynamic of a friendship relationship that was really important for people.
Yeah.
For me, it was more like, I mean, if I can assign myself, it was more like a mentor relationship. And, Jordan was a kid and I was in my 30s, except I think back in the Sherdog days, I was in my 20s. I'm not that old. I turned 50 this year. It was less of a friendship and more of a situation where I'm running this website and you have a lot of talent and let's see where we can go from here and what this can become. And through the 2 years that I worked with him, because I left Sherdog in 2008 and I went to Sports Illustrated to sort of really drive, their first MMA coverage.
Mm-hmm.
He did come out of that just Japanese niche. He definitely expanded while I was there. But I think once I left, he flourished because the reins were off, right? And
Right.
It just became sort of Jordan Breen and the Sherdog Show and these people who had a lot of talent, and it was their thing. When I left, I never went back and sort of tried to exert what control I had while I was there. I never tried to influence what they did, what their coverage was, what directions they took. I was a reader like anyone else. I supported them. Some of them were very close friends. A lot of them were, work colleagues, really is how I treated a lot of those relationships. Mm-hmm. Jordan was kind of a balance in between where, we were very different people. I respected his ability to communicate. I thought that was really rare. Mm-hmm. And anytime I had a chance to talk with Jordan, I appreciated it. Probably not in the moment. I wouldn't have known to appreciate it, but I never came away from an interaction with Jordan feeling less than positive about what we had just gone through. There were very few times where we butted heads. I can't think of any.
Yeah, for sure.
I was really proud of him to see his growth after I left Sherdog, and he was given and really ran with so many opportunities to flourish in the space.
And yeah.
Go ahead.
I think, no, I was just going to say, like, one of the things, and of course you were someone there dealing with probably his written work more so than his audio work, which obviously he expanded and grew on. But I think that's, something I mentioned to some of the other guys today, like, as amazing as he was as an orator and speaking and getting through a podcast, his writing might even be more exceptional than that. And that's something that, I was always envious of, his ability to write. I mean, can you maybe just speak on that a little bit, kind of how much he flourished and you kind of getting your hands on him when maybe he was at his most raw?
Yeah, even at his most raw, he wrote clean copy and was like, really great. I think it was the third story he ever wrote, but he wrote a big feature on Shinya Aoki. Yeah. He'd done a couple, like a news piece here and a short little blurb here. And I actually went back, and if you go you can go to his bio and sort of list of stories in Sherdog, and I went all the way back to his first one, and you look at the dates, and it's like I remember myself holding him back because there was only times where it was like 1 or 2 story a week, and then there was some times where it was like every day, and I knew that if I asked more of him, he would deliver. So I didn't want to do that. But when he did write, it was something you needed to read. Mm-hmm. And I certainly went through a lot of copy, and where that wasn't the case for a lot of people. A lot of people needed a lot of work. A lot of people needed pieces to rewrite. And editing Jordan was clean copy, and it was a good read, and he got what he wanted to get across, and he made the subject matter live on the page. So all of this, fed into the talent that he had. And again, I think it goes back to maybe his strongest suit, just in terms of this space, was his communication ability. And that really flowed into every kind of, podcast, written story, television, streaming, anything he wanted to do. Now, Jordan wasn't the crazy looking character that he became to be when I first met him. He was a clean cut kid. And, I had no sense that buried deep inside there was this really eccentric looking character who he became. I remember the first few times I saw him later, after he sort of took on I'm not going to say persona because he was himself, but took on the look, that he did, I was like, what, Jordan, what do you do? Like, what is going on here? What is your deal? But it just felt natural, and it's just who he was. And so I obviously never questioned it. He was being himself. But, I appreciate the outpouring of support that people have given him because of his writing, because of his words, his ability to communicate, all the things he did in the space. A lot of people came into the sport as fans during the time where Jordan really was prolific. And I know the influence he had on how a lot of people saw the sport at the time. I will say the one thing that I really sort of just journalistically appreciated about Jordan was that he was unafraid. It didn't mean that he, did a hit piece. Like, we have all these sort of framing of what people think journalism is, even when it's criticism. He didn't do that. He didn't write hit pieces. But if something needed to be said about someone, an event, whatever it was, he did it, and he did it in a way that was smart in the end, and valuable. Valuable. Jordan was a valuable member of this community because of his desire to do good journalism, because of his communication ability, but also just he loved the fights. He just loved it. This was at a time coming out from the dark period of the sport where really the people watching it had that passion. They had to have that passion in order to find it. And so Jordan clearly had that. He found it. And then, this is the first sport of the internet era. I believe that mixed martial arts came up with the internet. And without the internet, I'm not sure that it ever would have beat back the powers that were trying to destroy it. So Jordan was a product of that. He was a product of the the internet era that MMA was going through. And there were points where I felt really lucky to have stumbled across his path. Now, I will say, and I've said this to you, and I was wondering whether I would say it today, but I will say it today. There have also been moments along the way as Jordan sort of receded from the space and became less prominent, and his voice, he had this outsized voice, and that started to diminish. And I think he pulled back in his own ways for whatever reasons, that I did have some sense of, like, this is a kid who could have done anything. And I had some role in bringing him in here. Now, I think Jordan probably would have found a path into MMA regardless, but I certainly had some role in that. And he quickly took the ball and ran with it. Had I not done that, would he have done something else? Would Jordan still be here? He got a degree in sociology. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah, he could have done whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't think that there's that much importance on the decision that I made in terms of saying, hey, this is someone that I want to bring into the fold. And I can see his want, his desire. But man, he deserves so much better.
Yeah.
Jordan deserved much better. Even if he may not have known it or cared or realized or whatever, but just as an outside of observer, the spirit that Jordan had as a human being, and the intelligence and the awareness, and on top of that, the ability to communicate all of that to people in a way that they loved, that translates across any fields, any walk of life. And he could have done a lot of things. Now he gave himself to us. And it was clear to me that as he became more entrenched at Sherdog, and really that became part of his, part of who he was, that he was never, ever going to go away. And that was fine. A lot of us were happy to be in the space, make a living as best we could. And Jordan had dedicated himself after he stepped into it. So, those thoughts, I think, are unfair to me, but I'm not going to pretend that I didn't have them. That maybe Jordan Breen, the person, the human being, would have been better off without being so invested in this mixed martial arts world. But he was. The fact of the matter, and I think Jordan would appreciate the candor and the honesty, is that he was, and he made his own choices, and he lived his own life until he didn't. And, I think in honoring and remembering who he was, for me, since his passing, and I've had a more distant relationship with MMA, far different circumstances than Jordan, but I'm certainly not in the day-to-day thinking about it the way that I used to.
Yeah.
There were sparks of that passion, that old feeling that I used to have for the space following his passing. And I owe them to Jordan, because I remember how he felt and what he thought and the way that he lived his time. And I think it was okay to feel good about what we were watching in some respects. It's okay to feel like us taking our time to watch these athletes compete, despite everything that's going on in the world around it. There's value there. It means something. I definitely believe that for a long time, and I still think there's some truth to it, although it's not what it once was. And Jordan was a reminder of what it once was, and that's how I've tried to process what this has meant in the wake of his passing.
I love that, Josh. And I appreciate you being so open with your feelings and everything. And I saw him, in those later years post Sherdog, when he was kind of just, popping in and out with bloody elbow. You could tell he missed it and he wanted to be more involved. And for whatever reasons, obviously that didn't never fully came back for him. But I think he was at his happiest when he was at the most entrenched in the sport. So I think, as you said, he would have come down this path regardless. So definitely do not beat yourself up by any stretch of the imagination.
I don't mean to make myself out. I'm not beating myself, but it crossed my mind.
It's a totally fair thought. 100%. But just before I let you go, I've been asking everyone for a thought on UFC 316, a true or false. And as you said, you've kind of had some feelings about the sport flaring back up. The one I want to throw to you is obviously Kayla Harrison wins the title against Julianna Peña in the co-main event. Amanda Nunes comes in the cage. They face off. True or false, this fight between Amanda Nunes and Kayla Harrison is one that can go beyond the MMA bubble, can draw interest from people that aren't just hardcore fans. Maybe it's not the Ronda Rousey at her prime level, but this is a women's MMA fight that can do more.
I tend to doubt it, not because that's a knock on the fight or Kayla or Amanda. Mm-hmm. I just think the sport's in a different place, and the way that people perceive it and receive it is in a different space. That Conor Ronda time period, I don't think will ever be replicated. No. You will have stars that come along that capture the really the sort of the love and the gaze of the audience, and mainstream audiences may come back at some point, but I don't think so. I think the UFC space is much more insular and closed than it's been in a long time. I do think that among the fan base, for very good reason, people will be excited by that fight. I would be interested to see that fight. I would have loved to have seen either of them fight Chris Cyborg. That never happened, but I know you asked for true or false, and I'm sort of like riffing here in a Jordan Breen kind of way. I do think that the times have changed so much that drawing mainstream attention for a fight like that seems a bit of a stretch. They deserve it, and it'd be nice if the UFC could promote fights in a way that would draw in mainstream audiences for what was happening inside the cage from a competitive standpoint and really a sporting standpoint. But that seems to happen less and less. And it hasn't really happened in a way recently that I remember that it felt like years ago. So I know that they'll get the shine and they deserve it if it happens. I certainly would love to see that match take place. Kayla deserves all the credit in the world for her career arc, the growth that she showed. She's exactly the kind of athlete that you'd wanted to see in MMA when Jordan and I were coming up.
Yeah.
Like exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to see her progression as a mixed martial artist, to really express her dominance as a competitor, and all that stuff's awesome. And you want to see her tested by the best because she wants that in her heart. And so I hope the Amanda Nunes fights happens. Be great for American Top Team and for mixed martial arts and for the UFC. And I hope I'm wrong and it does translate to mainstream audiences. But yeah, anyhow, that's my thoughts on that.
I appreciate it, Josh. And it's always great to hear your thoughts on our sport. As I said off the top, you're an OG and someone who I very much looked up to when I first got in this industry. So I thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your insights and your memories about Jordan. It means a lot, and I appreciate you.
Appreciate you, Mike, and all you've done in the wake of Jordan's passing. And thank you for everything. And I thank everybody for Jordan's memory, man. Keep it alive. It's important.
All right, now joining us is David Bixenspan, who is a former Sherdog contributor with Jordan Breen, hosted a podcast with him called Two Scoops, now is currently doing another podcast called Between the Sheets, some freelance writing around the industry. David, thank you for being here. I guess just tell me first how you first got to, work together with Jordan, your initial impressions with him.
I'm trying to remember if he made the initial outreach or not, but if it was him, or I feel like it would have been initially him or Jack, depending on what podcast it was. Because yeah, I don't remember if my first Sherdog radio appearance with Jordan was. It was either a press row or a round table, I think, and I don't remember which. But I know it was something with Jordan. But in the event that it was a round table, Jack is probably the one that made the contact. And we just hit it off very quickly. We realized, especially on those press row shows, that we had similar interests and had good podcast chemistry. And we became very good friends pretty quickly after that. I would say even for a spell there, he's one of my best friends. We were talking all the time, day and night. And we realized, though, it's like, okay, we have a lot we both enjoy talking about. Certainly, we both would enjoy having an outlet for this stuff that's not combat sports that we would like to talk about. Mm-hmm. So we started doing Two Scoops, which only ran a few months and just before things kind of fizzled out, but which the people who listen to it seem to really enjoy, in which the feed, it's still visible in Apple Podcasts and everything else, but the hosting account doesn't work anymore. But I'm going to try to re-upload them somewhere else so they can be listened to through everyone's favorite podcast apps. Right now, if people look at the Between the Sheets accounts at BT Sheets Pod on both Blue Sky and Twitter, I do have a Google Drive that has everything linked in one of the most recent posts, so people can check that out in the meantime. But yeah, that was how we met, and we just, both big wrestling and MMA fans, of course, but then realizing whatever else it was we wanted to talk about, whether we were American Gladiators or Duran Duran or Law and Order or just weird cult film stuff like Sleepaway Camp, that it was definitely shared interest. And then whatever it was that I wanted to talk about that he wasn't as familiar with, he somehow found his way to get up to speed and learn more than I knew in the interim after first discussing it.
Right. Yeah. And I don't think you could define him better than that, right? Like just absolutely like to consume every bit of knowledge and everything he possibly could. And yeah, you're kind of, a lot of the people we have talking here today are kind of have a direct or more direct MMA linked to him, but I think that's what kind of makes your guys' relationship special. We all talk so much about how he loved and could talk about pretty much anything and everything, and you guys obviously leaned so strongly into that on outside of kind of combat sports when you could. So I think you kind of had the unique element of not only like when you're around him and he kind of brings that stuff up himself and goes on his classic diatribes, you clearly connected on that level in a different way than maybe some of the rest of us too.
Yeah, I can go off about a lot, and I'm probably just not nearly as refined at it as he was.
Sure.
But it made for some fun shows. One of the moments this last week that keeps jumping out at me is there was one time for the Patreon we did, and that Google Drive folder, and whenever I get the feed fixed, it'll have those shows too. We recorded ourselves watching Sleepaway Camp. Okay. And it was fairly late at night. I'm not going to get into spoilers for people who haven't seen it, but there is a scene at one point where a little boy is pointing towards a little girl's chest. And in describing that scene to the listener, my sleep-deprived brain said he was pointing at her thorax. Jordan, as you can imagine, became apoplectic. Her fucking thorax? her fucking thorax. She's not a giant insect, Bix, etc.
I love it.
That was one thing that really jumped out. I mean, I would say one of the other things that's really jumped out this week, because I was trying to think when you told me kind of what the framing for the podcast was going to be, was something specific that blew me away, and I couldn't really think of anything specific. It was more just kind of the overall mood, as I was saying earlier, and just the way he'd always be able to catch up on everything. But I would say the other thing that really jumps out, though, at least in this kind of little capsule format, is his way with telling some of the more lore-worthy MMA stories, but obscure ones, in a way that's like, they're fairly simple stories, but he had his own way of making them so much more momentous. Like the two that jump out as the big ones are the saga of Danny Lefevre, of course, which for those listening who wouldn't have been around for that, I don't remember all the details. You probably remember it better than me, but the gist is that there was just this local martial artist, tough guy, Danny Lefevre, who got into a dispute with very well-credentialed international name, Benji Radich, who was, what would you say, easily one of the best non-UFC fighters of, like, the 2000s boom, right?
For sure. Agreed.
Yeah. And they ended up in this beef over a girl. They fought on a regional show. Danny Lefevre knocked him out with one punch and never fought again.
Yeah.
And the way Jordan would tell the story, which clearly stuck with people because Danny Lefevre is one of the specific MMA references dropped by Owen Smith in the Jordan Breen show theme. But the way you would tell that, and the other one that sticks out to me, is the saga of Frank Waston Jr. So, one of the things that's come up this past week, but I don't feel like people are necessarily really understanding the full scope of a lot, is that Jordan was one of the key people behind the Fight Finder on Sherdog.
Yes.
And the thing that I don't think people are really appreciating enough is that, and I'm not saying this to shade Tapology or anyone else, most of the other MMA databases and places like Wikipedia got everything from Fight Finder.
Yes.
Yes, Tapology has done good work. They've added a lot of stuff that was not in Fight Finder, like the canceled fights and stuff. Mixedmartialarts.com has done a very good job in doing what it needs to be to make it the official Association of Boxing Commission's MMA database. So I'm not sliding them at all when I say that, but it's all built on the work that Jordan and others did with the Fight Finder. So one of the things that Jordan and company had to deal with was trying to sort out our managers sending us fake fights, trying to vet all this, and also dealing with language barriers and stuff. And in time, there was this Brazilian prospect they kept hearing about, named either, depending on which fight it was, I guess, they would either call him Frank Waston or Frank Waston Jr. And eventually everyone realizes once he gets to the UFC, oh, that's Luis Enrique, nicknamed Frankenstein, because whoever was sending his results into the Fight Finder was some Brazilian that had such a poor grasp of English spelling that he thought Frankwaston is how you spell Frankenstein. And it's one of those things where it's a funny enough story on its own, but the way Jordan would tell it just made it so much better. And I'm sure in the archives that TJ has on the rounds, feed, I'm sure there's some version of it up there. But that's one of the things that sticks. I will always remember the one part where he's like, oh, Frankwastn. Yeah, that's how you spell Frankenstein.
That's gold. I love that. It's an amazing story. Yes, hopefully we can dig up the archives of those classic rants at some point. Okay, David, before I get you out of here, I've been asking everyone for a take on the fallout of UFC 316 this past Saturday. I know you're someone that, on top of following the sport of martial arts, have a deep love of professional wrestling and stuff. We see Kayla Harrison here. She's really coming into her own, obviously, as a champion now and a personality. We see her bringing Amanda Nunes into the cage after the fact. That wasn't a plan for the UFC. She basically forced that upon them by continually calling her in. We'll give you this true or false. Is Kayla Harrison right now, I guess, the best personality in women's MMA, and how good a job has she done at setting up this fight with Amanda Nunes?
I mean, true or false for the first one, definitely true.
Mm-hmm.
Because really, there haven't been a lot of strong personalities in a while. Post Rousey, post Ioane and Jacek. There were some great fighters, but there haven't been like some really like big personalities. So I would say, yeah, like absolutely, she definitely has more of a personality than everyone else that's been around as far as really trying to sell that fight hard. And then what was the second half again?
Yeah, just I mean, like, how did you like how that was executed in the cage? Their way of setting that up, and just I know some people don't like the pro wrestling element of the sport, but that felt like something really nice in that regard, and building a fight and leaning into all the theatrics available to you.
Yeah, because anytime you do that, it does seem like as long as the fight actually happens,
Yes,
as opposed to the many
Brock
times the
Lesnar and
UFC
Daniel
is
Cormier.
the first Liddell Vanderlei Silva attempt. But anytime it actually happens, like with GSP and Matt Hughes, it's something that always sticks out with people. Like, oh shit, they confronted each other in the cage after one of them won the title, kind of thing. Like that, it sticks with people. So I think that was very smart on Kayla Harrison's part, and I think in promo spots and all that, I think it is going to help sell the fight. To what degree, I don't know, because they're pay-per-view business. We don't have that many specifics. We know it hasn't been that great lately, but does have she does have a lot of the qualities they've been looking for in like a media savvy champion that they haven't really had in a lot of the divisions lately.
So
You
true.
know,
Yeah.
so I think whatever the ceiling for a women's title fight is right now, um, or at least going into this as a main event, I think they're gonna blow way past that. I just don't know exactly how well, but I think they're certainly gonna do about as well as they possibly could.
Yeah, for sure. We'll see when, where, what kind of undercard, and all that stuff they give it. All right, David, I really appreciate you being here and doing this in our honor of our friend Jordan Breen. And yeah, very much thank you, man.
Thanks for having me.
And joining me now is TJ DeSantis, a man who I almost consider a voice to be almost synonymous with Jordan Breen, because I've listened to so many hours of you two together on Sherdog Radio. You're definitely a duo to be thought of highly in this industry. TJ, I know we've been kind of taking this news hard over the past week, but here to kind of celebrate Jordan and our memories of him, I guess, first of all, when do you recall meeting Jordan Breen for the first time?
Oh God, like in person?
Sure, whatever. Maybe both. Share your first
I
work
don't
connection, and maybe when you guys linked in person.
I don't know. Probably whenever we did this thing called the EA Sports Sherdog.com Fighter Exchange,
Mm-hmm.
where Gegard Mousasi, Patrick Cummins, Jacare, Jason Miller, like basically like actually, now that I think about it, I think Cummins was like the protege, but like with the EA Sports game coming out, the MMA game, they took basically like well established Strikeforce guys and gave them like a young up and coming fighter, and then sent him somewhere around the world to go train. And I think Mayhem and Pat Cummins were paired together, and they went to Brazil. Mousasi and Jacare both got stuck here in Southern California, and Breen was the sort of embedded reporter that went with Jacare. I was the embedded reporter that went with uh, Mousasi, and yeah, we hung out a little bit, and that was the first time I got to witness the many things that Jordan Breen was.
Yeah, for real. And as I alluded to, so many hours spent on radio together. I mean, like, I'm sure over time you just got used to his brilliance and his ranting and his raving and just his ability to do that. But was there like a time that you were particularly awestruck by, like, something he said or did in that regard, just like kind of going into his endless memory bank of this sport we all love?
So someone asked me recently, like, how many hours of shows have you done with Jordan? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know what the total number of hours that I've done just an MMA podcast is. It's definitely north of 10,000. But with that in mind, Breen was probably on it for like 40 to 50% of it, because we did so many things at Sherdog. We did every day between 2 and 4 hours a day of radio. And he was my co-host on Beatdown for a while, and we had revolving guests. I produced every Jordan Breen show. I produced every Cheap Seats show with him and Greg Savage. So even when I didn't talk, I was still communicating with Jordan in that environment. I would just butt in every once in a while. Breen would hit me with my least favorite sort of offensive thing that you can say when I talked on his show, which was "Welcome to Beatdown," because Beatdown was my show, so I can't interject without getting some flack. But like the thing that I think is so amazing and what took me aback about Jordan was just his ability to be creative effortlessly. He really took to like radio. Like the Sherdog Radio Network was built on my knowledge of FM radio, and I wanted to take that and add it to the podcast space. But like podcasting, Mike, wasn't even a word. Like we had done at least 10 episodes on Sherdog before I'd ever heard the word podcast. And someone said, "Hey, you should get your show on podcast." I'm like, I don't know what that means. But like he would start his show every episode, welcome to the Jordan Breen Show, the MMA show that is celebrating sandwiches. I'm Jordan Breen. Alongside of me is the peanut butter to my jelly, TJ DeSantis. Like he would come up with something unique
Sure.
every day. And like Mike, I'm pretty sure that he would put 22 seconds of thought into it, if that, but he would be able to pull it out.
Yeah, no, it was so amazing. I remember when you guys had me on like press row for the first time, he would always have that little thing, and you see, the guys like Chuck Mindenhall and Ben Fowlkes like putting out old emails with him, inviting him on the show, and there's always just a little bit of Jordan Breen spice on it that kind of made his communication unique. And from my side, I've mentioned this with a few of the other people on today, just like those early years before I even got into MMA media, and I was working my last real major job, like doing construction, working graveyard shifts and stuff like that. And I'd listen to you guys for hours, and those would help me get through those, many nights of sitting in the trucks, just waiting for my chance to get out of the car and flag the big concrete truck across the street. And those were so formative. And I'm seeing a lot of those from like so many people, those kind of messages that like that era of fans who got in, you guys were just so educational. Is that like a kind of overwhelming theme you felt from a lot of the people in that era since we learned this unfortunate news?
Yeah. I mean, you said educational, and it threw me in a different direction because like people don't realize that Jordan's show had a name, like a cause, and that was education and regulation. Educating and regulating Jordan Breen, Tuesdays and Thursdays on the Sherdog Radio Network. And I haven't cried yet, Mike. But it's tough, man.
I know. It's been a very hard week for us all. And I mean, I guess if you want to speak to this, like, this scholarship we're trying to put together in his memory for sports media, someone that, cared about that side of it. I was talking to Josh Gross earlier, and, he said when he kind of brought him in, preaching the journalistic element, and, Jordan had his own way of pursuing that. And hopefully we can give someone an opportunity, through this scholarship for all that. But I guess, you were there for those press row episodes. A lot of people in the media have talked about how he gave them an opportunity. He was not against platforming any outlet or any person from any outlet. We maybe don't get as much of that in MMA media today, and that's something I'd like to hold on to and kind of try to do for others. But I guess you probably knew when you were putting those shows together, and he's maybe running through what guests he wants. What kind of perspective do you feel he had on that, and just wanting to share his platform and his knowledge with others? And also, when he did have those people on, he never made anyone feel lesser with their opinions, even though he was much smarter than us all.
I mean, we talk about Jordan being so many different things, and he wanted to talk about all of those things and more and how it related to MMA and all the things about MMA that people didn't necessarily want to talk about. And like, I think if I had to think about, what Jordan wanted to do the most when it came to his show was he wanted to point out everything that was wild and crazy about MMA. And back in that time, like we had it. Like, I mean, we did post fight radio for Moosin. Like, let's say Moosin to someone today, they don't know what we're talking about. I saw the UFC's Octagon enclosure that they're using for their UFC BJJ, and I was like, oh my god, it's the Yama Pit. You know what I mean? And, like, Jordan would talk about all of that stuff with everyone, and sometimes it was very serious conversations too. It wasn't all fun and games, but like you talk about platforming and you talk about sort of what is lost today is you're doing a podcast right now. What's the most important thing about a podcast in the modern day? I think it's 30 to 45-second reels. It's not a 2-hour show. It's not appointment listening. The money is not necessarily there, and we don't consume content, I think, the way that the art form is. Like, I believe I get real romantic about radio and broadcasting and podcasting, whatever this is. I mean, this is a television show. That's what it feels like. I got to look at my big dumb face. But I think that's something that's gone by the wayside, and I feel almost sort of lucky that we saw Jordan do what he did because he couldn't watch the Jordan Breen show, and I think the mystery of what you didn't see made it special. You didn't see the listeners, you didn't see the guests. It was something that you listen to, and when you listen to things you consume it differently, and it becomes an embedded part of your life, much more so than something that you will see for 30 to 45 seconds as you're scrolling Facebook or YouTube or wherever you go. And I think about it, I'm like, Jordan Breen could have been the best Nina drama in the world. Jordan Breen could have been. I mean, Jordan Breen was the MMA guru. It wasn't a gimmick. You know what I mean? No offense to the MMA guru. I don't mean
No,
anything.
of course. I've thought about that too, though. Like this era, he was perfect for the era that you guys had, and like you said, educated and regulated for those people that needed it at the time. But if you fast forwarded to now, he would have been perfect for this too. And you would imagine he would have had a YouTube channel with hundreds of thousands of subscribers and all that kind of stuff. He could have worked anywhere in this space.
It was the mastermind. If you want to spell it MMA mastermind, that's how, you can do it that way. That's the gimmick. But he truly was the smartest kid ever. Like, you could, dude, it was so frustrating. I'm 4 years older than the guy. And I remember this specifically in 2007 when we started the Jordan Breen show. I was frustrated that he knew everything that I knew about MMA and then would correct me when I'd be like, well, it's such and such. Like, well, no, TJ, it's actually this way and that way. But it was about pro wrestling. It was about new metal, which Jordan didn't even like the crappy music that I listened to. But like, he would just always know. And like, I don't know if it was a photographic memory. I don't know what it was, but he was able to just consume things, archive it, and then bring it back on demand in ways that I don't think I'll ever meet another person that is quite like it. And I think that's what's sort of so heartbreaking about his passing is like he could have been anything you wanted to be in this sport. If he wanted to be a UFC matchmaker, he'd be a UFC matchmaker today. If he wanted to be a promoter, he'd do that. If he wanted to be, a journalist and still doing what he was doing, I think he would have done that. And it's just to be able to have all those opportunities and to make a lot work, but pass away so young before he could ever sort of take that next step is truly heartbreaking because, dude, I would love to do one thing the right way. I can't, I mean, I'm doing my best, trying to do my best, but like Jordan did so many things so expertly. Cause that's the thing too. Like, if you want to ask me like Jordan's greatest contribution to MMA, other than just being himself and the interviews and the shows that he did, was the Sherdog.com Fight Finder. He put so many hours of work into making the Fight Finder, what it is today. And I don't, unfortunately, think things change over time. Maybe that's not the destination for everybody to look up a record. But at one time it was. And it was so much so that if that Fight Finder wasn't updated, even if it was a mistake, it was enough to make it so you couldn't get in the UFC. I mean, it was that highly respected. And I still think it holds some clout, but like Jordan put so many hours into making the Fight Finder able just to have amateur records put in. And I think it was like 3 or 4 years, Mike, before the amateur records even showed on the website. But he was diligent about getting all that information in as quickly as he could. And he had, I think I think one of his first official titles was Sherdog was Fight Finder Czar. I think that's what he decided to call his title. And he was a good fair czar, but he lorded over that in many ways. And he was always ready to go down the rabbit hole and tell you about Guns N' Roses, who's an actual fighter in the Sherdog.com Fight Finder, I promise you.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And heard some of those sentiments echoed by others. His significance to the Fight Finder, like you said, a massive contribution, and everything else you said there was amazing. A true one of one. That term gets overused, but it could not have been more accurate when it comes to Jordan Breen. And just before I let you go here, TJ, I mean, he loved to talk about the sport. You guys spent so many hours talking about the sport. We just had UFC 316 last weekend. I'm kind of hitting everyone today with a talking point coming out of that event. I want to ask you about Patchy Mix, obviously not the debut that many people are expecting, himself included. We have seen debuts not work out and people go on to greatness. Eddie Alvarez comes to mind, lost to Donald Cerrone and then goes on and wins a UFC championship. True or false, Patchy Mix will fight for a UFC title one day?
Oh, God, that's tough. The Patchy Mix we saw on Saturday will not.
Mm-hmm.
But the one that probably will come back and be phenomenal. I think so. The kid is insanely talented. I mean, I don't want to spin this off in another direction too much, Mike, but like, I really feel bad for Mario Bautista because he got honestly like a career-defining win, a win that could put him as an alternate fighter for Sandhagen and Merab if that's the next fight. Maybe he has the opportunity to sit and wait. I don't know. It's hard to sort of know what is definitively next in any title picture, but I don't think people are putting enough shine on Mario Batista's victory because maybe not the best Patchy Mix showed up, but maybe this is a bold proclamation, but I think Bautista and Patchy Mix will both vie for UFC gold one day.
Yeah, I think that's a totally fair thing, especially if Merab Dvalishvili continues to dominate this division. He's going to need new opponents. He's going to need fresh challenges, and obviously neither of those guys have mixed it up. So they definitely have that there. Yeah, they have that in their benefit for sure.
Last thing I will say real quick on the Jordan Breen set, because it ties into this. Jordan, in around 2008 or 9, was the first person to tell the world, in my opinion, look out, these Russian Caucasus states are going to take over. MMA is going to become incredibly boring because you're going to have all these wrestlers dominate everyone. And that's, I mean, I don't think it's boring. I think it's beautiful and amazing. But he knew all about the Dagestanis and the Georgians and everybody from the Caucasus states that eventually were going to come into the UFC and run roughshod.
Yep, for sure. He was far more knowledgeable about all this than all of us, and he was able to have that foresight. So I appreciate you being here, TJ. Obviously, not the best of terms, but this has been a great time to honor Jordan and talk about the sport he loves so much. So thank you.
You made me cry, Mike Bohn, and I thought I was going to hold it together. But if I was going to cry with anybody, it was a privilege to do it with yourself.
Thank you, man. And joining me now is Jeff Sherwood, founder of Sherdog.com, someone who has deeper roots and goes back in the sport far longer, probably since almost I've been alive, Jeff. You are one of the most important people in this industry, especially on the media side. I wish we were speaking on better terms, but I know Jordan Breen thought so highly of you. I personally, from my conversations with him, I don't think it's a stretch to say he kind of looked at you as something of a father figure to a degree. Can you just tell me, like, I guess when Jordan first came across your radar and maybe what made him unique to you?
Well, actually, Josh Gross was the one that brought him in. So I got a phone call from Josh Gross, and he said, "Hey, I've been following this young kid's, tweets and social media and everything, and he really seems to know his stuff, especially about the Japanese MMA." So that was his specialty. So we were looking for somebody to expand Sherdog's knowledge as a whole in the Japanese MMA. So, I mean, everyone kind of knew Pride and things like that, but Jordan knew everything. Like, it was crazy. So I said, well, let's give him a try. And that was kind of the only conversation me and Josh had about it. And then all of a sudden I see Jordan around and start talking to him on, I'm going to date us a little bit, but AOL Messenger, which basically is how we ran SureDog for years and years. And just having normal conversations with him, you could tell Jordan was, he was different. Like his knowledge, his memory, just everything. Like he would bring up such random stuff, even as he became more involved in SureDog and was one of the main pieces. We would have like round tables, and the things he would bring up, I would just sit there shaking my head, going, "How? Like, how does he remember these things? How does he even know some of these things?" And it was just amazing. He was just his mind about MMA was just above and beyond anyone that I've seen in the sport. I mean, he was definitely a unique individual, and he was 19. I don't know if I mentioned that. He was 19 at the time. And we just let him run with it. And, he started off at the website basically doing small write-ups about Japanese MMA. And then pretty soon, he's full blown doing everything, interviews and turned into podcasts and just everything. He just, at that time, I mean, most of that time I felt that by us having Jordan, we had the best mind in MMA that was out there.
Yeah, truly. There's a reason they called him the mastermind, and I think what made it so special too is like a lot of the talk is on the Jordan Breen show and Beat Down After the Bell and all these podcasts and radio shows that they had known well. But he was such an incredible writer too, and there was no thing he couldn't do. And I think that's what made him stood out. And I think as someone who does a lot of writing myself, like you could only hope and dream to be articulate things the way he could in that regard as well in the written word.
Yeah, he was, and interviews, like one-on-one interviews. I got so when we did the launching of the EA Sports video game, and SureDog was in charge of that, what we did was we sent people to different camps, and we split us up into twos. I was with Jordan. So we went and spent, man, I think in total was like 2 weeks together, just me and him in a hotel room, going to the local gyms and interviewing people. That's when I really, really started to spend a lot of time with him and realized, like, man, this guy, he can do everything. Like you said, writing, interviews, podcasts. Like he had so many hardcore fans to his podcast. I mean, it was such a shame when they started gutting the SureDog Radio Network, and we lost so many good shows and so many good people. And I don't know. I still get messages, hey, is there any chance you could get a reunion? And I mean, this, a podcast, just hop on you, TJ, Breen, and, maybe somebody else, and just do it at an oddball time and see how many people show up. But, we talked about it, but it just never, obviously we all know what happened. And then all of a sudden, none of us were there anymore.
Yeah, and I guess just the last thing on his contributions there. I mean, some of the other guys have spoke on Fight Finder and how instrumental he was in that, and we know how instrumental that's been to our entire industry from a media education side, and obviously fighters getting the credit they deserve and all that type of stuff. I mean, what can you speak on that a little, like the impact he had on building the Fight Finder brand to what it was?
Yeah, there was so many people that go way back. Getting that Fight Finder going, keeping that Fight Finder up to date. I remember when Garrett came to me and said, "Hey, I got an idea. Let's make this giant database that has every fight that's ever happened and every fight that's going on, and we'll document it with all the information." And I was like, "Hell no, that's way too much." So he's like, we're going to do it anyways. I was like, okay. So we started off with a young kid by the name of Ryan Graham, who probably nobody knows. Like back in the day, Ryan was kind of the equivalent to Jordan. He had all this rare knowledge of all these crazy fights that happen in Japan, crazy fights that happen in Brazil. So we worked on that Fight Finder for like a year and a half before we even made it live. So we got all that stuff in there, and then Jordan just coming onto the website, getting involved in the Fight Finder, going to find people in these small, tiny places around the world to send him crazy results that happen at a nightclub in Holland on a Thursday night. And, you know, that was a never ending job. And as you could, I don't know. I mean, I'm not so much into MMA anymore. I mean, I do watch and you know, talk. All my friends still want to talk to me about it, but I can't really carry on a huge, knowledgeable conversation about it as much anymore. But
Sure.
it seems like the Fight Finders kind of dropped off a little bit, unfortunately. You know, but Jordan had a huge impact on that. If you go find a tiny show at some nightclub in Brazil or something, Jordan's probably the one that reached out and got those results and posted them on the Fight Finder.
Yeah, totally. And it's I remember being him when he had to deal with, you know, fake fake results and all sorts of things that you had to go through to verify and validate, but he did as well as anyone. And yeah, for me, like, you know, coming up in this industry as a reporter, that was one of the most valuable tools ever. And just you go down wormholes for hours. I'm sure I'm not the only one that had that experience too. But before I get you out of here, Jeff, I know you said you don't follow the sport as closely as you used to, but I know you kind of kept a half eye on the UFC 316 results. And I've been asking everyone today for a little bit of a thought on a storyline coming out of that. This one was hard to miss, of course. Kayla Harrison becoming a two-time Olympic champion, two-time PFL champion, and now UFC champion. And that's enough, I guess, to lure Amanda Nunes out of retirement after 2 years. A lot of interesting elements with Amanda. You know, she's been off for a long time, but true or false to you, what do you think? Can Kayla Harrison beat the returning Amanda Nunes?
I think so. Like you just mentioned, 2 years off. I mean, you take 2 years off of anything, you know, and you're going to be way rusty. And when you're coming in to fight somebody like Kayla, you can't mess up. You can't be rusty. I would almost like to see, and of course, it doesn't happen in our sport. I mean, sometimes it does. You go back to the old Chuck Liddell days or whatever, but give Amanda a tune-up fight. Get her in there with somebody, but then you know this is real. She might lose that fight, and then you lose the Kayla fight. So I would feel more comfortable if that happened, but I think her just coming off that long, you know, the long retirement, well, 2 years. I don't see it in the cards for her. I think Kayla gets the job done.
Yeah, and then maybe they do a rematch, and maybe Amanda wins that one, and then sets up the biggest trilogy fight in women's MMA history. But
As long as it's close, I'm all for it. I mean, if it's a close fight, and then you could possibly say, well, you know, Amanda was a little rusty. Now she's been in there again. Let's set up a rematch and see how the next one goes. I'm for that too.
For sure. Awesome, Jeff. Well, I appreciate you being here. I wish, again, it was under better terms, but you're someone that I felt it was very important to have here and honor Jordan's memory because, as I said, you were a very instrumental piece of his life, both professionally and personally. So thank you for coming on and talking a little bit about him.
Yeah, thanks for having me in mind. And yeah, I wish it was different circumstances too. And yeah, we're gonna miss Jordan for a long time. I mean, this really hurt when you know, I got the news that morning. That whole day I was like a zombie. Like I couldn't get off the couch. I just sat on the couch and you know, just kind of thought about things. And yeah, but yeah, I'm glad. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Last but certainly not least, here as we pay tribute to Jordan Breen on this episode of the Bohnfire, a man making his debut, someone who, Ariel, I wrote you down for this week to hopefully be on the show months ago, and kind of, you know, worked out. But obviously you knew Jordan before I did. I think you did a preview show with him at UFC 261, and I started working at MMA Media at September of 2020 or 2013, so a few months after that. But do you recall kind of the first time you crossed paths with Jordan, I guess, in the MMA media world?
First off, thank you very much for having me. It's great to be on. Second of all, it's not often that I can correct you, but it was 161, not 261.
161.
Yes. Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Yeah. Shout out to Andrew McGahan for posting that and reminding me of that. And it was just a wonderful trip down memory lane. Obviously, I wish I could be on talking about more positive things, and I know that you were a lot closer to Jordan than I was. I went back and read some of our texts over the years, and all of this is truly heartbreaking. And to see the outpouring of love and support is nice to see. But again, it's a reminder that like we don't do this enough when people are with us, are alive. We don't remind people of how much they mean to us, how special they are, how important they are. And I know there's a lot of new fans to the sport, fans that were not watching back in UFC 161 days in Winnipeg, who need to know that guys like Jordan are what made MMA so much fun to watch, to follow. He was truly a walking, talking encyclopedia of MMA knowledge. But not only that, as you know, he was a brilliant human being. He was well read. He was well versed in so many different subjects. Even if he maybe didn't know about something, he came off as someone who knew a lot about any topic under the sun. He was eccentric. He was colorful. He was unique. He did his own thing. He marched to the beat of his own drum. And even back in the day when Sherdog was kind of on the outs with the UFC and whatnot, you never felt like he needed anything from anyone. Like he was perfectly content doing his own thing, talking to the people that he wanted to talk to, covering shows the way he wanted to cover them. And again, like his knowledge, just like it had no limits. It was unbelievable, the stuff that he would talk about. And like I pride myself on having some sort of historical knowledge of the sport. I couldn't even hold a candle to what he would come with. So just a brilliant mind, a brilliant soul, a huge supporter of all things combat sports, and obviously a great journalist as well. And just very hard to wrap your head around the idea that he is no longer here.
Yeah, for sure. And we kind of want to, pay tribute to kind of the greatness and the mind he did bring to our sport. Is there like any interaction that you recall where there was like something he said or reference that kind of blown you away? I feel like kind of everyone who was around him at some point was just like, and you kind of alluded to there, something small could come up and he could take it a million miles. But is there anything you recall where he had a moment like that?
Jordan was, I think, most known for his podcasts, his conversations, things like that. But I thought he was a brilliant writer as well, and I don't think that he got enough credit for that. And I was reminded when I was reading our text that he wrote a story. I think it was either right after. It was right after Conor McGregor lost to Nate Diaz. So in March of 2016, and he wrote a story about essentially like Dana kind of losing his fastball as a promoter. And it was just brilliantly put back when people weren't really saying that sort of thing, didn't have the guts, didn't want to, whatever. And I remember just being sort of like blown away, like this is an incredible column. And so when reading my text, I reached out to him to tell him like, this was unbelievable. Like you hit this out of the park. And he was very humble about his writing. He was very humble about, like, I don't think he was someone who necessarily puffed his own chest out and said that he was the best. But I just remember back in 2016 when a lot of people weren't writing pieces like that, or for whatever reason shied away from that type of coverage. He was unafraid to do that. He was unafraid to tell the truth and to tell it like it is. And I think that ultimately that's what we want out of our media. That's what we want out of the people covering the sport. And also important to remember, like he was so young. He was so freaking young, wise beyond his years. Like when he started with Sherdog, I mean, you may know the answer better than I. He was in his early 20s, if not late teens.
I think he was like 17 when Josh Gross first found him, and it was like a couple years of doing like not being kind of on the outside, and then I think like
that's a prodigy.
Right around 20.
Like he was a prodigy. Like I don't use the word genius lightly. Like he came across as a genius. And again, I hung out with him on fight weeks and stuff like that, but I would never call myself a best friend of his. But the fraternity is small, and you get to know everyone. And obviously being a fellow Canadian, I appreciated that. He represented Nova Scotia very well. So yeah, man, it's it's just tough. And the other thing is like you go back and look at his Twitter. And again, I know you were super tight with him, and he just kind of disappeared the last few years. And then you just kind of, it's just a reminder how fleeting all of this is. Like we get so bogged down on the details, on the week to week, on we got to do this, we got to do that, and like just like that, all of that can go away. So I hope it's a reminder to check in on your friends, to check in on your loved ones, and if someone does disappear for a while, it's important to just send a text, just check in. That could go a very long way.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's very well said. And I remember the first time I mentioned this to some of the other guys, like when he had me on Sherdog Radio for the first time, it was so intimidating because you're like, I feel like I know something, but like this guy, like, he could dominate the conversation so easily and just has, so much to give. It was terrifying, but as we became better friends.
And also he would invite you on one of these preview shows and it was like legit 2 to 3 hours. All right, let's start with the first fight. And it's like, we're 45 minutes in and we're 3 fights in, like, golly. But he could talk, like, I'd love to know if he could pull that off in today's UFC with some of the Apex cards. Probably can.
Yeah, I would be curious because like I do feel like he came at the perfect era. Like I think he educated a lot of people. Like I mentioned this as well. Like when I first kind of came across him, I was working graveyard shifts doing construction, like living in Vancouver, and we had to sit in a truck for 7 hours.
Wow.
And I would listen to all those shows, like your stuff as well, everything I could. But he was like, really helped that. And when I first met him in person, it was so cool. But yeah, like just his knowledge was second to none.
Amen. Yeah. And he has been missed as of late, and obviously now knowing that he is no longer with us, he will definitely be missed. And I think it was really nice to see a lot of his close friends, his colleagues, former colleagues, just everyone paying tribute to a guy that, one thing that I feel like we don't do well in MMA as a whole, and that's the media in particular. Like we don't celebrate the history, we don't celebrate the past, and there isn't an extensive history, so it should be relatively easy. So I don't want people like Jordan Breen to be forgotten. And I think we all have to do our best to remind, especially the newer fans, that there were people 10, 15 years ago covering the sport brilliantly in ways that would be appreciated today. Like it hasn't evolved past them. So yeah, all of those thoughts came to mind over the last few days.
For sure. And I guess I'd be curious to know how he would work in kind of the YouTube world now.
Yeah.
I could only imagine he could have a great channel or something.
Oh yeah,
like
for
that,
sure.
But, yeah, very unfortunate. But I think as another way to kind of tip our cap to him was kind of look back on the history of MMA and UFC a little bit here. And what I'd originally wrote down when I wanted to have you on 15 years ago this week is when you and I first met at UFC 115 in Vancouver. And I will pull up this classic photo. I think you've seen this one before.
Classic.
Of you interviewing me. I have the bit of the duck face going on there.
Yeah, what is up with that face?
I think I was in the middle of talking when they took the photo. That's the only thing that makes sense to me, right?
Who took the photo?
Yeah, I think one of my very good friends, John. There's the same photo with you and 3 or 4 of my buddies, like interviewing them with the mic and stuff. And look at that, the fan house mic.
Yeah, that's old school AOL. And I love your shirt, by the way, WC shirt. Yeah, that's how you know that you know what you're talking about. What's the hat? Is the hat an MMA hat?
It's a Cubs hat, which I can't explain.
Okay, fair enough. It's all good.
I really can't explain.
I remember exactly where we were here. It was at that hotel. Was it a Hilton? It might
Sheraton,
and there was there was sort of like a bridge, a walkway.
Yeah.
And this was back when the open workouts and the media day were all in like a little hotel room. And I remember we had just finished, and that card was headlined by Chuck Liddell versus Rich Franklin, Carlos Condit against Roy McDonald. That shocking turn of events. And so for some reason, maybe because we've talked about it so much, and because they did a few events in that same spot, I remember exactly where that was. I remember that day. I remember that shirt. I love those events in Vancouver. Those are great crowds, and it was great for me to go there because I never had any reason to go over there. So yes, I remember that vividly. And then I remember also not too long after. So that was 115. I remember UFC 149 in Calgary, and you were there covering it for Fight Cove. Yep.
Yeah.
And I remember we went to a Stampeders game. I remember that was July of 2012, my first time in Calgary. I remember buying a little football for my son, who at the time was 2 months old and is now turning 13, amazingly. And I remember sitting with you in the stands talking about how like this was your first one and how you wanted to make a living out of this and how you wanted to, like, do this for life, and this was a huge deal for you. And I asked you why Fight Cove, and you told me it was like where you were from. It was a nod to
Yeah,
that.
I was born in Deep Cove.
Exactly. So I remember all of that well, and look, you've done it, and then some. And it's funny. I was thinking about this earlier as well. Like anytime a young person would reach out to me and say, like, how do I get into the business? I would always cite you, because you were young at the time, you wanted it, you went out and got it, but you also did a great job of looking at the landscape and saying, okay, what could I do differently? What could I add? You didn't try to be me or anyone else. Like you had your own thing. And so like the factoids, the stats, all that stuff, that really, I think, put you out there, and people were like, oh shit, who's this youngster? And honestly, I don't see a lot of people doing that still. Like there are people, there are definitely people who have come, since you came onto the scene. Shout out to Nolan King, who I think does a great job with MMA Junkie. And there are people who are doing different kinds of media. There's the Ninas of the world, the Schmoes of the world, the MMA gurus. They have there's MMA journalism has always evolved and will evolve and change, but I haven't seen a lot of people do what you did, which from a like a writing traditional media standpoint. And that's obviously no knock on anyone. Like everyone has to find their lane. And so those that I mentioned found their lanes. But I'm wondering when, the next wave of youngsters is going to come. Maybe maybe you're seeing them and I'm not.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's kind of the same perspective. I get, those same messages that I sent you back in the day, like, and I try to, be as thoughtful with the response and everything as possible, but it's tricky now. I mean, obviously the volume of jobs out there isn't probably what it once was when I came
But you
in, which felt
created
like
your
a
own
very good
job. Like
time.
you created it and then
For
you took a
sure.
chance. So
yeah, and I think another really good piece of advice you gave me on like kind of that front too was like the stats and all that kind of stuff. It helped build up like an audience and a following, and that was off something that was a little different. It wasn't like I was coming out of the gate being like, this fighter is going to beat this fighter, like read my breakdown. It's better than people who have been here for 10 years breaking down fights. But once you build up that following through the stats, then you can start throwing out some opinions and some takes and some predictions, and they maybe get more traction at that point and people have more respect for your opinion. So that was definitely
very
something that I took
important.
in mind as
Look
well.
at what the landscape is producing, and it's okay to take a little bit, but try to be different. Shout out to Oscar Willis. He's I don't want to say new, but like he has come over the last, I don't know what it's been now, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So there have been people, but I kind of wish there were more. And now that I'm on the sort of like editorial side of things with Uncrowned and trying to build a roster and stuff like that, I pay attention to this even more, and I actually see it a lot in boxing. There's a lot of Mike Bohns in boxing. There's a lot of youngsters and I'm like, where are those guys in MMA? Because you would think it would be easier in MMA because MMA skews younger, but the coverage is more, video, social reaction, and less of the more traditional coverage, which I still think that there is a place for if you do it well.
Yeah, I do see at some of these events I've gone to in the last year, you see some of these younger guys who are trying to make their way at like the cage side presses. I've met a few guys that are like, they'll go to Phoenix, and someone from the University of Arizona who loves MMA will get credentialed for the university, and that's like their chance to get in the door. So there is some people there, but yeah, the question is where the full-time jobs that you could fully
that's a
cover
good
the
point.
sport off, and sometimes you got to splinter. It's tricky, and I feel we're very grateful that we've found our way and had that type of opportunity because they're few and far between. But yeah, anyways, as we move on here, Ariel, I kind of gave you a little bit of homework. As I said, that was UFC 115 15 years ago, and I said I want us to run through 15 MMA takes from the past 15 years. Some of them can be positive, negative. They can be big, small, whatever we want. Do you want me to start, or would you like me to give you the floor?
Go ahead.
First one. Okay. My first one was UFC's merger with WEC, which they added the weight classes in October 2010, has been more significant than the Strikeforce acquisition in 2011 as we sit here in 2025.
Yeah, I mean that's a solid. It's funny. The Strikeforce one was one of mine, which we could get to in a moment. But yeah, I mean you added 135, you added 145, you brought over some 55ers, some 70ers, some 85ers. Do you think as many big fights have been produced as a result of the merger? Because like when you consider DC, Overeem, Nick Diaz, I don't know if they've made as much money, but for like the sustainability and the longevity of the company, adding those weight classes was huge. It's an interesting debate.
Yeah,
So what's your thought
for sure.
process?
More so, I mean, I look at what 135 and 145 are for the UFC right now. You know, the fighters that we got through those divisions, the Conor McGregors, you know, the Max Holloway's, all these people. Of course, 35, you can make the case is the deepest weight class in the sport right now. And there's not many of these guys lingering, obviously, that were, you know, Dustin Poirier is going to be kind of the last of an era there with WEC when he retires. But just those two weight classes are sustaining. Of course, all those names you mentioned, and you got to bring up Ronda Rousey and women's MMA. Those were the weight classes that really kicked it off from Strikeforce as well. But I don't know, like as we sit here now, what are the more valuable weight classes to the UFC? The women's divisions or bantamweight and featherweight?
Yeah, so like that had the, like I said, longevity, but in the moment, I could go with mine just since we're talking about it. It wasn't going to be the first thing that I was going to mention, but so I kind of, how should I say it? I wish that we can live in an alternate universe where the UFC didn't buy Strikeforce. What would have happened? You know what I mean? If they had so much momentum, and so on the flip side, like
heavyweight Grand Prix,
the Grand Prix,
I'd love to see
they were doing women's MMA. UFC wasn't, so that was their thing that they had. And it differentiated them, but they had, like, you know, solid homegrown talent, a mix of veterans as well, the Diaz's of the world, the Robbie Lawlers, etc. If that would have gone on for 3, 4, 5 more years, could they have been a viable number two? And I don't mean like, oh, like obviously as a result of the acquisition, we got some mega fights, right? We got Jones, DC, and like you said, Ronda and GSP Diaz, all that. So, you know, it's a little bit of revisionist history to say like, oh, maybe it would have been better, but they were the last great option, I think. You know, Bellator was a little bit of an option, but I don't think they ever had the same momentum that Strikeforce did. And so I kind of wish that like we could just do like a, you know, like a sliding doors thing and see what the landscape would have been if they never would have sold.
Yeah, and again, it wasn't a Scott Coker call, as most people may think it was. No. It was the parent company above him, and I'm sure if it was up to him, that would not have been how it unfolded.
100%. Yeah, 100%. I mean, they could have been still around. Who knows? Or went a little longer and really made the UFC sweat. You know, who knows? But there's never been anyone, in my opinion, close since, and we ain't getting that for a very long time. Anything remotely close to that, that's for sure.
No, I mean, look what's happening now with all the Bellator guys. UFC didn't even have to buy them, and they got their best fighters in the end anyways. So, madness. Okay, you go back to back here. Okay. Go with what you were going to start off with originally.
Well, I'll just say, and this is a little bit hyperbolic, but the worst thing the UFC has done over the last 15 years were the uniforms. I wish we could go back to just I just don't think it was necessary. You know, it's been talked about a million times, but they wanted to clean it up. They didn't want the NASCAR look and all that, but like, look at the cage, look at everything. And even like the uniforms now have multiple things on it. Some have the crypto, and then it's the Venom, and it's the monster. It's like, it's getting more and more loaded up. And this isn't even from like I hate the fact that the fighters lost that income, because that's a whole different discussion. It's just like, I just love the individuality of it all. I love that like guys were able to showcase who they were, from Chuck and Tito with the, you know, the ice shorts and the fire shorts, to Joanne Calderwood with her, you know, with her kilt, to everything in between. Like, it just was a way to, you know, to GSP with the gi and all that stuff. Like, I just missed that, and I think it added a lot. And I wish they didn't do it.
Yeah, and I mean, we got the custom fight kits now, but they even still lack a little bit. It's something. It's better than nothing, but you know, we would like, you know, to have those vintage ones. I think at the BJ Penn black belt shorts as well. God. Those ones were iconic. Like there was some sick ones. But,
oh my God, yeah,
that's kind of part of the corporatization of MMA, unfortunately. I guess I'll go with one off, not necessarily off that, but maybe a more slightly negative one. The UFC has signed way too many fighters in the past 5 years, like since the pandemic era. If you could take a guess, just even ballpark, how many fighters do you think they've signed since COVID in 2020?
Oh, wow. I will go.
Or how many people have made their UFC debut? Because obviously they've signed more. Some people dropped
Let's go.
off.
This is probably going to be too much, but let's go with 1,200.
About half that,
Okay.
581.
That's probably too much.
So
That's a
yeah, I
lot.
mean, it is. We had there's been 43 already in 2025, 103 in 2024, 125 in 2023, 99 in 2022, 88 in 2021, and 123 in 2020. And
That's a lot.
they can't fight all these guys. I mean, it's just the reality. Like, you can't do 2 to 3 fights a year with everyone. I've been kind of tracking something over the past few years to see how many guys are actually getting, like, how many fights per year, and it's not a ton. Like, I can pull it up here.
Yeah.
I had the
What is
last
it?
one for last year. Let's see. Yeah, so in 2024, 631 fighters had fights. Fighters with 4 bouts, 5. Fighters with 3 bouts, 61. Fighters with 2 bouts, 266. And fighters with 1 bout, 299.
Wow. What happened to the we
So
got to give them 3 fights?
I know. I mean, it's I get it. Like, there's injury, all that stuff, but you see these situations, like a guy falls out on a few days' notice, a week's notice. They usually are signing someone new. You have to imagine, when you have all these fighters on roster, you can get someone you actually have on the deal. And I
Sure.
think that is what makes the interest grow in the sport. You need the same people fighting regularly so fans can get attached, so everyone can follow their stories and stuff. It's hard, I think, this way to gain real traction unless you're someone special.
Hard to track this, but I wonder how many of those guys that they signed in the last 5 years became stars or have the ability to become a star, or are they just like card filler uppers? Like, how many of those dudes are future Sean O'Malley's?
Sure.
I don't know if many. And that's
Yeah.
going to be the thing. Like, one of the big talking points over the last week or so is like, is the UFC washed, cooked, all these things. And obviously, like, my thesis is right now, like, they're killing it. They're about to get $1 billion deal and all that stuff, multi-billion-dollar deal. But we'll only truly know, like, the impact of this, what we're talking about right here, the oversaturation of the roster and whatnot, like, in 5 or 6 years. If they're not looking ahead and preparing and scouting and signing the right people, who in 5-6 years, like a Paddy Pimblett, for example, Paddy's going to hit for them, but Paddy was already somewhat established even before he got to the UFC. He's just sort of leveled up here. Who are those guys? I'm sure they're going to emerge, but are there enough of them? Are they doing, like, WWE recognized this in like the mid 2000s, and they said, like, we need to start preparing for the future. So that's why they started NXT and all this stuff, and they started their own performance center and started recruiting heavily collegiate athletes and all these people. What is UFC doing? I've always felt that one thing that was super, interesting to me is, like, every baseball team, every basketball team, every football team has a scouting department, right? Like, there's a ton of people who travel all over the world who are, like, if you're in the NBA, you're going to games in Europe and Asia and stuff like that, and you're looking for the next, Kristaps Porzingis and all that.
Yeah.
Ultimately, correct me if I'm wrong, the UFC scouting department is 2 people. It's Mick Maynard and Sean Shelby. You know what I mean? For the most part, right? Like, who else is signing? Hunter Campbell is doing deals. He's brokering deals. He's signing. He does a great job. Dana is more of a figurehead at this point. I've always
Be looking for a fight. Like, that's the closest he does to scouting.
exactly. I always thought that like they should have like a 5 to 10 person scouting team who like one dude just focuses on Europe and one dude just focuses on Asia, and maybe they're so big that the people just come to them, and maybe there's no, like, in the NBA there's 30 teams, so like the Sixers and Knicks are battling for the same guy. Maybe that's not the case, but like, I've just always felt, I've actually felt bad for them because I felt that their jobs are just so stressful as it is, like day to day with these fights and the pullouts and stuff like that. How do they look to the future? So we'll see.
It's totally fair. I mean, I don't know what they've done on that front in recent years. Like, I know there was times years ago where they'd send Sean Shelby to Asia or China for like 2 weeks, and he'd go through there, like going through gyms and going to some shows and stuff like that. But I really don't think that's happening the way it used to be, just because, again, it's such a strain. And I've said this many times before, like, to the people out there, I'd say 80% of the UFC product we see is plan B, C, D, E. Like, the amount of times we see plan A come to fruition, whether it's a main event, a John Jones versus Tom Aspinall, all the way down to like the fight they best hope for the prelims or something. Like, it's usually not working out perfect. It's a product of this guy's contract is running out. We owe him a fight. Like, there's this, and this. It's just putting this insane chessboard together that's like almost impossible to keep up with. And it's again, they probably need more than 2 people to deal
Yeah.
with that. It's a tough gig for those guys, but they've been here for a while.
Yeah.
So I remember back in the day, Joe Silva, he showed me a photo of his in his basement lair. He just had cabinets of VHS
Wow.
tapes that managers would send him that he would watch of, like, Shudo fights and things like that. And that's how he would scout talent. But now it's obviously infinitely more accessible.
Right. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'll skew positive.
Yeah, let's go.
2016, greatest year in UFC history, not just of the past 15 years, but it will go down, in my opinion, as the greatest year. 5 pay-per-views did over 1 million buys. 196, 200, 202, 205, and 207. And like every single pay-per-view, I mean, I know them off the top of my head. Condit Lawler, fight of the year on the second day of the year, UFC 195. Then of course 196 with Connor and Nate, and that was a whole crazy story just getting to that point. 197 is like the lone sort of like so-so one. That was the return of John against OSP, but that was a crazy one. Like he was in an orange jumpsuit 3 weeks before the event. Remember that?
I remember we were supposed to do. I did this whole massive feature for Rolling Stone. It was supposed to be the only Rolling Stone print story on a combat athlete they've done.
Oh
It was
my
on the
God.
John Jones comeback. It was all this stuff. I went to Albuquerque, spent like 2 days with him, all this stuff, and then the first blow to that story was DC pulling out, and then the second blow, I had to do a bunch of rewrites, and then John gets arrested. At that point, they said it's just going to be an online story. Like, we can't fix this in time. And they've never had a combat sports
Wow.
lead in Rolling Stone since
Wow.
then. So, but yes,
No,
go on.
that was crazy because he was supposed to fight DC and he had to win in order to save the DC fight for UFC 200. 198 was Stipe beating Verdum in the stadium in Curitiba. 199, actually the anniversary of that was yesterday, the crazy Bisping Rockhold fight. 200 we know about. 201 Lawler Woodley, incredible knockout, shocking. 202 was Diaz versus Connor 203 was the Cleveland show with Stipe, and CM Punk was on there as well. 204 the late night Manchester card with Bisping and Hendo. 205 MSG. 206 in Toronto, maybe not the best main event, but you did get Doo Ho Choi against Cub Swanson on there. And then 207 was Ronda's last fight, Cody versus Cruz. I mean, it was just amazing. And then 5 pay-per-views over 1 million. Like, it was banger after banger that year. So yeah, that's my favorite year.
Yeah, no, that's a great one for sure. I was maybe going to see if you were going to come with that best year of the past 15 years, and that one's a layup. As okay, I will switch gears somewhat here. Another positive one, I think. November 2011, UFC starts implementing 5-round non-title main event fights. I thought that was an excellent decision. I believe the first one was Mark Munoz and Chris Lieben, I think. And I mean, that's obviously been something that's been very important for fight cards and, getting more important results, allowing things to play out, all that. It's hard to even think of a world where it was always 3-round main events for these fight
How
cards.
do you feel about 5-round co-mains?
I think it depends on the people, obviously. Like, I mean, when we're getting to the point of like Aaron Blanchfield versus Rose Namajunas as a co-main event on a fight night in Edmonton, I know that was circumstantial. Like, they added a different main event because maybe tickets weren't moving as well, but like still stuff like that. But in a perfect world, like, all title eliminators are fights between 2 top 5 guys. I think should be 5-rounders.
I agree, and I wish that we should go. I wish they would do more. This is a number 1 contender fight. They never ever say it. They kind of just leave it. There was a time back in the day where they would say, like, the winner of this fight is getting a title. Like, it would be billed as such. It would be promoted as such. And those fights, in my opinion, should be 5 rounds. 5 rounds for the sake of 5 rounds. Like, I don't know. Chandler Oliveira, I don't think needed to be 5 rounds. Like, there were no real. I mean, I guess in the end, Chandler got a title shot off that win, but you know what I mean. Like, if it's just a random fight, I don't think it needs to be 5 rounds. For whatever reason, there's been a few of those lately where I'm like, well, why does this have to be 5 rounds? Ultimately, not complaining. It's usually with great fighters, but if it was for a number 1 contender fight, I personally would like that very much. Another one that I had was just the ESPN deal being one of the most important, if not the most important turning points for the UFC, because they always wanted to be with ESPN. They and I know people like to complain about Plus and all this stuff. Like, just think of the days of Spike and even the Fox days. Like, now you're watching the NBA finals and there's an ad for UFC 316. that's
Yeah.
unthinkable 10 years ago. You're watching NHL playoffs, and like on the ticker, there's like the little picture there on the right, and it's, you know, Merab's face and Suga's face. Like that, you can't buy that. Then .com. There was once a time where .com would like barely touch MMA, or SportsCenter barely touch MMA, and we all know ESPN's involved in a sports entity. They have a rights deal with them. They're going to cover it more. It just makes all the sense in the world. And so once they did that, and you know, I was lucky enough to get there right before, so I got to see like what it was like before and what it was like after, and you could just see like everything gets ramped up, and what was always so interesting about those early days was the anchors. Like you would go in SportsCenter and they knew nothing, and so like I would have to write the questions for them. They'd be like, "Oh, it's a UFC 214. Can you tell us something to talk about?" So like I would give them angles and stuff like that. But you know, no one knew that, and all that stuff, you know, goes a long way in my opinion. And so they became a part of the conversation. And then the like the combo of the pandemic hitting as they're on ESPN with no other sports going on, and the rise of sports gambling, and so everyone's doing their parlays and stuff like that, like that leveled up the UFC. You know, it was a gigantic turning point for them. So yeah, the ESPN deal was huge, and I think they're going to stick around. And I think it would be foolish for them to not stick around, and I think it would be foolish for the for ESPN to not re-sign them.
Yeah, I'm just curious what it looks like if we're just going to get the exact
Right.
same formula format or anything. That's why I tried to kind of ask Dana about it whenever that was a few months ago, being like, could this have less events
Yeah.
or more events? And yeah, I mean, hopefully that's the case. I don't know. Hopefully we get some answers in the next month or two here.
By
Is
the way,
that kind of your sense?
speaking of that, I wanted to just add another one. And this is not so much like this is a take as a result of what has happened. I wish
Sure.
the UFC would go back to like 30 events.
Absolutely. I think that would make a ton of sense. And yeah, you could do one pay-per-view, one fight night, and if maybe two fight nights. If you want to throw an Apex card in there every, you know, second month, or if you need one
Yeah.
every month, so be it. But yeah, I think that
30
would
would
make
be
everyone
really, really nice.
yeah, I could even do 35, but yeah, 42 to 43
Too
is
much.
a lot.
Too much. And I
It's
feel
way
bad because like they have so many fighters, right? Here we are at the beginning of the conversation talking about
exactly.
fighters needing fights, but the quality just isn't there. You know what I mean? Like it just doesn't mean the same. It used to mean like if you were UFC caliber, like that meant something. Now you could be
100%.
2-0 and be in the UFC, for God's sakes, and just not be elite. So I just think the cards would be better, top to bottom. The cards would be better, more
I
entertaining.
think so too, and kind of, you know, reference back to the thing with Jordan Breen. I saw someone post like something from one of his shows, and they were talking about the aforementioned UFC 199, and like he was talking about on how his show people were complaining that was a bad card, and if you look back at it now, it's
Wow.
like it would blow your
Yeah.
mind how good that lineup is. You would dream for something
They
like
were
this. It'd
saying
be
that
like our
about that
UFC.
card. I guess so, yeah.
Apparently, that was yeah, a clip that I saw surface where it
Wow.
was like, okay. Yeah, crazy. So I think the complaints won't end no matter what happens. It's
Exactly.
just the way it is. People love to complain, but so be it. Okay, I will switch to one here. This is more on an individual. Nate Diaz made a mistake leaving the UFC in 2022.
And when you mean mistake, do you mean from like a monetary standpoint, from a legacy standpoint?
I think all of the above. I mean, I don't know. You tell me. I'm sure the Jake Paul fight did great, but it sounds like the boxing match with Jorge Masvidal was a
Yeah.
disaster. And then here we are, you know, he's taking reality shows in Thailand and leaving and then saying he wants back in the UFC. I don't think this, like, where's the real fight Inc.
Yeah.
fight cards and things like that are happening, right? It just doesn't feel like he maybe got everything out of this that he wanted. And I don't know what would have happened to the UFC. Maybe they would have matchmaked him hard and he would have lost 5 in a row. And, you know, we're sitting here talking about him on a Tony Ferguson-esque losing streak or something. But I don't know. It just felt like he hasn't maintained the star power, the relevance since leaving the UFC.
Yeah, that's a great one. I think, yeah, I mean, there's just no denying it. I don't know how much he wants to fight at this point or to do MMA. I know he's talked about wanting to go back or ending his career there, but I wonder if they could do it again if they would. Now, I don't know if from a monetary standpoint, and it's not just about that because he was doing okay by the end. If he would have made with how infrequently he fought, like he was only fighting once a year, once every 18 months or something like that. If he would have made as much as what he made in the Jake fight alone, but you're right, the Masvidal fight was a total disaster. with that promotion, Fanmio and all that stuff, and that's been it. And even losing to Jake, obviously, you can never predict these things, but that doesn't help as well. Though he got back on track with the win over Masvidal. So yeah, I think that's a really good debate. I can even piggyback off of that and say that the Mayweather fight was a mistake. Now, again, for Conor, and I don't say mistake. I don't say mistake as in like, obviously he made a boatload of money, but I wish again we could do the sliding doors thing and say like, if he doesn't take that fight, does he stick with MMA? Does he not change his stance? Does he not get blinded by this and that? And like, he was so good, man. He was, I don't need to tell you.
He was one of the best fighters I ever
Yes.
saw. That version of him, and when he
Eddie
beat
Alvarez?
Eddie Alvarez, insane.
He doesn't get enough. That version doesn't get talked about enough like that. And by the way, that fight came 3 months after the Diaz rematch, right? Diaz was August. That was, and remember the Diaz fight, he leaves the arena on crutches. Like he was banged up, but he wanted to fight at MSG. He wasn't coming back 3 months later for wasn't MSG, but there was like a weird thing that happened where Endeavor just bought the company. This was a huge, money earner for them. They didn't have to invest anything. Showtime did all the production. And so they were like, all right, let's do it. If they don't sell the company and don't give him that rope, because if it was Lorenzo, if it was just Zuffa involved, I don't think they let him do that. They didn't have to let him do it. But I think Endeavor wanted him to do it because they were sort of, they had paid so much and they were blinded by it all. I just wish that we can see what life would have been like had he just stuck with MMA, because he was so damn good. And maybe he's defending both belts. Maybe he drops the featherweight and just defends the the lightweight title a few times. Yeah.
There was that moment in New York at the weigh-ins with Woodley. He maybe could have actually had the chance of being
Oh
a
my
3-division
God.
champion.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff there. I think that I'll spin it the other way and give Conor McGregor a more positive one here, what I wrote down on my list. I think Conor McGregor is the most legit simultaneous 2-division champion we've had out of the 4. And I know he didn't defend either title, but I'm saying getting them, and I'll compare them. He obviously beat Jose Aldo to become undisputed, beat Eddie Alvarez at lightweight. Amanda Nunes, I would have her second probably. She beat Miesha Tate and then beat Chris Cyborg. Those are huge. Cormier got his light heavyweight belt given back after Jones failed the drug test for the second fight. And then he KO'd Stipe, which is very legit. Then Henry Cejudo won a debatable split decision over Demetrius Johnson, then won a vacant belt against Marlon Moraes. So to me, like, and how it happened, I think Conor is the most legit one of those.
Wow. 4. Yeah. I don't disagree at all. And I think he could have actually gone for a minute. Those cuts were getting tough, but like he could have gone up and down a couple times. Yeah, 100%. What a time. And it was so freaking fun to cover those events, right? There was just such an energy surrounding them, and he was so great. And yeah, I hope we can get back to that type of, I don't know if it's him involved, that type of vibe at some point.
The closest I've felt since those days was the UFC 300 press conference. Like that was just with every fighter up there. The crowd was so electric. I mean, not to pat myself on the back, but like that moment with the bonuses, everyone was going insane. Like you don't really feel that energy very often before in like a UFC environment.
Yeah. And there was so much anticipation, but like to me, it was lacking one superstar. I mean, there just isn't anyone who's ever on the who will ever be on the level of Conor, but yeah, it's just fun when the sport has those guys. For me, the Apex is the best thing to ever happen to the UFC and the worst thing to happen to the fans. I just wish, I understand why is it the best thing? Because it allows them to put on these events and not spend a dime, essentially. I know they're spending on fighter purses and whatnot, and there's accommodations, but like you don't have to take the freaking trucks to move the cage and the lighting, and it's unbelievable what they're saving. But you remember that first event when they went to Jacksonville and it was the first one in front of the crowd? Like, I wish it ended then. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just wish, and by the way, I don't want the Apex to close for Tough, for Contender Series. I think it's perfect. It's a way better version of what they had before. But these events, man, I don't know about you. Like, I find it very hard. I have a hard time, especially when you're sitting down. And I love boxing. I love the NBA, and you're like moving around from different events happening at the same time, and then you switch on that, and like, what is this? You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I do. And it's I think we're consuming them in different ways too. Like I'm having to work a lot of these fight nights. So like I'm working with, videographer Ken Hathaway who's there filming the backstage scrums, and there's like 2 media members back there, and you're having to listen through these scrums to find a headline or a social clip, and it's just like there's not much there. It's really like you're scraping the bottom of the barrel. And then yeah, I mean, as you allude to, like UFC product, financial side, amazing. The in-cage products, I don't know how you could sit here and say like this is the best we've seen. And I don't know if that is a product of these fighters are so much better that they used to be, that the fights just have less opportunity for finishes and knockouts because everyone's so damn good now.
I don't know
But
if it's
like, I
that.
think that is part of it. I think there's some of it. It could be down to the
Sure.
matchmaking as well. Like I think they're all pieces, but I do think
What annoys
these
me is
guys are
when people push back and be like, "Oh, there's so many events. They couldn't do this." I'm like, "Yo, they had the same number of events in 2020, 2019, 2018. They had the
yes.
same number of events, and they were in Prague, and then in Boston, and then in Chicago, and then in Indianapolis, and everywhere in between. Like they could do it easily, but how many
Yeah, no, I remember.
will there be this year?
Think they're on track for
No,
43
how many
again. Oh,
Apex?
Apex, I don't know. I mean, we're not getting any for the next 2 months, so I know there's two in August, I think,
Okay.
or maybe 3. I think our next one is August 2nd, so at least we have a Apex-less part of the summer here.
Yeah, no,
So
thank God.
that's something. But yeah, I don't know. I'd have to look that up and see the actual number. But yeah, I remember we were going to every different city like before COVID hit. I can't remember. I was in some city when Joseph Benavidez fought Davison Figueiredo
Virginia.
for the title,
Yeah.
Virginia, and I went straight. Didn't even go home. Went straight from there to Vegas for Adesanya and Romero, and then that was the famous Mark Raimondi press
Yes.
conference where I don't give a shit about
Yeah,
COVID and
yeah.
all that stuff. And yeah, but like we were doing that for years, just going a different city, every place. Like John Morgan, the stuff he was doing for MMA Junkie. Like remember when they would do back-to-back weeks? Like one time I think they were in Korea and then Australia and then maybe New Zealand, like 3 straight
Crazy.
weeks, and he went to all of them back to back to
Wow.
back. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I don't know if the staff are even capable of handling that now, but it used to just be normal.
Yeah, and obviously and those cards I think were better if you look at them at the time and even in retrospect. So yeah, I just I hope that they're phasing that out. It sounds like they might be. And again, I think it's perfect for Contender Series and Tough, but
and hey, if you insist, start a new series and give all these younger guys some sort of fights and call it like Apex Fight Series or something, at least brand it so it's not the same level as UFC Fight
I
Night
feel
Atlanta
bad,
or
especially for the fighters at the top. Like they deserve to be fighting in front of arenas, packed crowds.
for sure. Yeah, no doubt about that. Okay, was that your turn or mine?
That was mine.
Okay, that was yours. I will go to this one since we were talking about Conor McGregor and he somewhat has involvement in this. I'm going to say in January 2021, when Dustin Poirier fought Conor McGregor at UFC 257, that should have been for the undisputed vacant lightweight title, but the UFC refused to acknowledge Khabib's retirement, and we would be sitting here not having the conversation that Dustin Poirier might be one of the greatest fighters to never win a UFC undisputed title. I think he got robbed of that.
Yes, you're 100% right. Why did they had like the ABC event then the week before, and then they announced that he was retiring, right? But for some reason, why did they not want to? Now that
I think because Dana thought he was going to be able to get Khabib back for one more.
Right,
And
he was a big part of like the Abu Dhabi deal, and they didn't want to.
Yeah, I think they just wouldn't acknowledge it, even though he was like so clear. And I think it was a few weeks after when they, after Conor had won, there was the talk of are they going to do the trilogy? Should Dustin fight for the belt? And they ended up going with Chandler and Oliveira for May of that year, and we ended up getting Dustin and Conor 3 in that July.
Yes.
Yep.
Damn it. Poor Dustin.
Yeah. Feel bad for him.
I know. I mean, he got the interim belt at least. I know it's not quite the same. He got the moment of the belt.
He might get the BMF.
Yeah. How do you feel about the BMF?
I'm hoping it goes away with this fight, but it makes no sense now. They should have done it for the Ilya fight with Max. I don't know how you kind of sit here being like, this guy's just coming off a knockout loss and defending the title. It all seems
stupid.
I don't know. Yeah, it is. it's hard to criticize because I'm sure you feel the same way. Like Max Holloway and Dustin Poirier are probably two of the people we love the most in this industry. So I don't want to like shit on their fight or what the stakes are, but it's like,
it just none of it makes sense. It's like, when is it defended? When is it not defended? I love the BMF when it was just like a thing that Diaz talked about, and the moment they again corporatized it and made it into this belt and the stuff with The Rock and all that, it just it lost its luster. Like, to me, it should have honestly, it should have ended with the Diaz Masvidal fight. It should have been a fun thing. They caught lightning in a bottle. It was different. It was unique. And then it should have just been like, remember that BMF title fight? Like, how crazy was that? I don't like
a one-off.
I didn't like the way they brought it back. And then now it just kind of appears when they need a main event with a title fight. I don't know. Not my thing.
I think this leads in, and I think we know the reason that they do use it when they do is because they need to have a title of some sort to headline these pay-per-view cards. And it's seemingly like, even though they have all these divisions, seems like there's still not enough to go around. And that goes into my next one, where the UFC heavyweight division has been an absolute mess, I feel like, for the majority of this 15-minute window or 15-year window that we've been talking about. In the past 10 years, Ariel, there's been 11 undisputed heavyweight title fights. If you go back to 2010, there's been 22 in 16 years.
Wow, that's insane. Years. How does that compare? Do you know how?
There's a ton of interim title fights in there.
How does that compare to some of the other divisions? Is that the worst?
It's definitely. It's the worst. As like, obviously some of the women's divisions I think are less. You know, Zhang Weili is like defending once a year. Obviously you can't count featherweight, but for the most part, like, I'm not going through. You go pretty much through this whole decade. 2025 0 undisputed so far. 2024 1, 2023 1, 2022 1, 2021 1, 2021, 2019 1, 2018 2, 2017 1, 2016 2, 2015 1, 2014 1, etc.
Wow,
it's not great. And you remember those era too. Like, there was the time where Cain Velasquez and Junior Dos Santos and Bigfoot were just like rotating for the title and there, and it was just like the same few guys. And then there was that 3-year stretch where DC and Stipe fought for it every summer over 3 years, and there's nothing else going on. And then obviously this brings us to the current shit show that's going on with John Jones and Tom,
which I think I could piggyback up. Like, I think that John Jones's heavyweight title reign has been, I don't even know like what you could call it. Like, sham is too hard.
It's a farce.
But it's like he didn't beat the lineal champion. Yes, he beat Cyril Gane, who had just lost to the champion. And then he beats Stipe, who was, out of commission for 4 or so years. Like, if you want to compare it to GSP, at least GSP beat the undisputed champion. GSP, you can accuse GSP of saying like, oh, Bisping was damaged goods. Like, he knew about the eye. He knew that he could beat him. He wasn't Robert Whittaker, and he like sort of like pinpointed his shot. Fine. But at least he went in there and beat the undisputed champion and then gave up the belt. He didn't freaking hold anyone up. He wanted to go 2 division. Great. It was a moment in time. They sold it at MSG, and then he got out of their hair. What's happened here with John, dating back to the Cyril fight, has been, I mean, the word sham comes to mind. I don't know if I think that's too harsh, but extremely, extremely disappointing.
Yeah, and hopefully this is the month where we get answers. I mean, from things that I'm hearing, like, feels like International Fight Week is when they're hoping to announce whatever Tom Aspinall's next fight is, whether it's John or someone else. Could we get a curveball, Ariel? Is there any world where they re-sign Francis Ngannou and have him fight Tom? I see Eric Nixick out there talking about this with Luke Thomas on his podcast. Did they make a mistake?
I don't see why not.
I know Dana said what he said, but could it happen?
Well, if you're Dana is known to be one to hold a grudge, so
sure.
I think it's a little far fetched. I think it would be brilliant, and I wouldn't say never. I wouldn't say never, but I'm not saying that like I'm hearing any sort of intel.
No, of course, me neither. This is completely just like, oh, I saw that pop up. Like, PFL is not saying anything about Francis. I mean, he's obviously got far more significant things going on in his life than worrying about this. But that would be a hell of a way to salvage the heavyweight division if they could pull it off.
Oh my God, yeah, it would be incredible, and also it would soften the blow of the last few months, right? Like, oh snap.
Easy. And how bad does it make John look?
Oh my God.
It's like you wouldn't fight either of these guys.
Yes.
And now they're putting on a huge fight.
Absolutely.
So we'll see. I think I don't know how many more you have. Is there one more or two more?
Yes, I had one. And okay, so there were 2 that came to mind. Number one, I kind of miss the remember like okay, so there used to be these kind of go together. There used to be New Year's Eve ish, Memorial Day. I miss those sort of
Yeah.
like
Tent poles.
yes, I miss that. I feel like I don't like the year kind of ends on I don't it ends with a fight night. Like it used to end with a bang. It used to end with a pay-per-view and a big one, or the year would start depending on how it would fall, January 1st or something like that. Like it would start or end in a big way. And I miss the Memorial Day weekend cards. I miss like I said, the New Year's Eve card, the Super Bowl weekend card. Remember those back in the day? I miss those big Vegas pay-per-views. And then that leads me to my last point, which is MGM Grand infinitely better than T-Mobile.
Yes, no, those were the days. I remember that massive media room
I
downstairs
loved
at
it.
MGM, or the one upstairs. There was the cool one at Mandalay.
Mandalay was
great
great.
too. I loved
That
venue.
media room that like
Those
you
ones.
go in like right out of the tunnel. MGM had the Studio A and B upstairs, but the best was like you stayed in that vicinity. You walked into the hotel, everyone's buzzing. You're seeing people walking around. T-Mobile, there's something about it that just doesn't. I don't know. It just doesn't feel the same. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, it's such a massive venue, and everything just feels like it's beautiful, but everything just feels very spaced out. And I feel like for MMA, you kind of want that a little more intimate atmosphere. Not as intimate as the Apex, but
Yeah.
there's got to be a middle ground with these venues for sure. And
100%.
we've seen it many times. So, okay, here's my last one as we round this out. I'm gonna say what Alex Pereira did in 2024, 3 title defenses in 175 days, is now in my mind the UFC's most unbreakable record.
Wow.
I don't think anyone is beating that. I mean, there's some other ones out there. Jim Miller with his 27 wins and 47 fights, Charles Oliveira 20 bonuses, all his finishes. Like there's some tough ones, but to me, like the circumstances that led to that all happening, the fact that the last person that did it slightly faster was Ronda Rousey 10 years prior. So I don't see this happening again anytime soon. If so, maybe it's another 10 years away.
Yeah, I don't know if I could say unbreakable. Like, there's so many crazy things that happen in the sport, and also the schedule continues to get bigger and bigger. So it's definitely one of the most. You know what? I will say to add to that is just like it was one of the most impressive, but also things that like I don't feel like a lot of us saw coming. Remember, like when Alex came, like he came into the UFC as just like the footnote, like the guy who beat Izzy, right? He was sort of the Joe Duffy to Izzy's Connor, right? Oh, they have a history and maybe they could fast track him and you'll have a fun fight and that's it. And for him to now, I don't know if he's surpassed Izzy or at least is like sort of on his level in terms of popularity is pretty damn amazing, and I didn't see it coming. Like I obviously knew of him, and then I remember that LFA fight where it looked like he killed the guy, the last one before getting into the UFC. But to become this type of legend, incredible. And I don't think a lot of people were forecasting that.
No, definitely. It's been a pretty special time for him, and we'll see what he can do if he can pick that back up, or if that was just a window that he maximized absolutely, as good as he could have, which he certainly did. So we will see. That is an interesting one, and maybe we'll circle back on that one at the 25th anniversary of our photo.
Okay.
If we're still kicking
God
it.
willing.
All right, and I appreciate you so much for being here. Obviously, to speak on Jordan, to speak on all this. I'm glad it worked out because I'd had you down for this date for like 6 months.
Thank
I
you.
pulled it up. I think it was like last year. It showed me a Facebook memories. It's like 14 years ago since this photo, and I was like, okay, I'm going to keep this one in mind for Ariel.
Happy we were able to do it, and thank you for having me. And again, sorry for your loss. Keep up the great work, and much love to everyone. And hopefully everyone is using this as a reminder to make it some sort of positive, thing about checking in on others and just being the best friend that you can be to your friends.
For sure. And nothing more than Jordan Breen liked than talking about the sport of mixed
True.
martial arts. So I'm glad we got to do it. Keep killing it over there at the Ariel Helwani show on Uncrowned. Love what you guys are doing. And I will take a quick break and be right back to wrap things up. And that does it for another episode of the Bohnfire podcast. What an amazing and emotional show this has been. I truly can't thank Ariel Helwani, Ben Fowlkes, Luke Thomas, TJ DeSantis, David Bixenspan, Jeff Sherwood, Esther Lin, Casey Leiden, and Josh Gross enough for their time and coming on. This was easily our longest episode of the show to date, but I would not have it any other way as we celebrate the life of Jordan Breen and discuss the sport he loves so much. I hope you all have a better idea of what this man brought to the sport and helping create what he did, from all his contributions on Sherdog and the Fight Finder to everything beyond. Those were some incredible stories I got from his former colleagues and friends and everything. So I really appreciate all their time, appreciate all of you for listening if you made it to this point. If you want to hear more on me discussing UFC 316, so we didn't go too deep in the weeds on that, I appeared on this week's episode of Overreaction Time with Simon Simano over on MMA Junkie. You can check that out on the YouTube channel and the website. I will not be in Atlanta for this weekend's UFC event, but MMA Junkie will have Danny Segura on site for the card and bringing all the coverage you've come to know and expect over there on Junkie. Once again, before we close things out, we'll please ask you to check out the GoFundMe for the Jordan Breen Scholarship of Sports Reporting at the University of King's College, and donate anything you can. Every penny, any penny counts. So that would mean a lot, as you've seen the QR code on the screen and the link in the description if needed. With all that said, that does it for this week's show. I will see you all back here next week by the Bohnfire.
It's the Jordan Breen Show. Shut up and listen. Choke another host straight into submission. Got him covering them up like Muslim women. Blood in the